At my mother's birthday dinner, my sister leaned over her $50 glass of wine and whispered that I could not even afford to breathe the air in this restaurant. I stayed completely silent, taking a slow sip of my water. Then, the executive chef marched out of the kitchen with his entire team, bypassing every celebrity and politician in the room to stand directly at our table. He bowed his head. Miss Elisa is the new autumn tasting menu perfectly to your standard. My entire family stopped talking. My sister slammed her glass down and demanded to know why a Michelin-level chef was speaking to her failure of a sister with such reverence. I smiled, a very slow, very dangerous smile, because they had no idea I owned the very building they were sitting in. My name is Elisa, 33 years old, and for the past 5 years, my family considered me their ultimate disappointment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to sit through a family dinner while the people who share your blood try to tear you down piece by piece. The restaurant was called Laura. It was currently the most exclusive dining reservation in all of Chicago. Getting a table here required months of waiting, or knowing the right people in the hospitality industry. My mother, Linda, had been boasting about securing a reservation for her 60th birthday for the past 6 weeks. She reminded everyone in our extended family group chat, daily ensuring they knew just how much money my sister Courtney and her husband Bradley were spending to celebrate her milestone. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a simple tailored charcoal dress. It was elegant but understated, deliberately chosen to blend in rather than stand out. The maitre d' recognized me instantly the moment I stepped through the heavy glass doors, but a subtle shake of my head told him to treat me like any regular guest. He played along perfectly, guiding me to the private alcove table overlooking the spectacular Chicago skyline, where my family was already seated. Courtney was 35 and draped in obvious designer labels that screamed for attention. Her husband, Bradley, wore a suit that was tailored just a bit too tight across the shoulders, constantly adjusting his expensive watch so the ambient lighting would catch the diamond bezel. My father, William, sat at the head of the long table, radiating his usual arrogant authority, while my mother, Linda, basked in the center of their collective self-importance. The moment I pulled out my chair, the assault began. Courtney looked me up and down with a sneer that twisted her perfectly manicured face. She leaned across the pristine white tablecloth, her eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised contempt. Really, Elisa, you wore that to Laura. I know you were struggling, but you could have at least gone to a decent thrift store. You look like you are about to attend a funeral instead of Mom's birthday dinner. Bradley let out a sharp, patronizing laugh, adjusting his cuffs. Give her a break, Courtney. It is hard to keep up with the latest fashion when you do not have a real job. He picked up the heavy, leather-bound menu and tossed it carelessly across the table. It slid and hit my water glass, spilling a few drops onto the immaculate white linen. Here, Bradley said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. You should probably just order the tap water tonight. They do not have a discount meal section for unemployed dropouts here. I looked at the menu and then at my mother, fully expecting her to intervene and demand some basic respect at her birthday dinner. Instead, Linda took a delicate sip of her expensive champagne and sighed dramatically. Bradley is just being honest, darling. We all know how hard things have been for you since you threw your life away. It has been 5 years, Alyssa. 5 years since you dropped out of your culinary program and brought such intense shame to this family. We try to include you in these high-end experiences so you can see what true success looks like. But you simply refuse to elevate yourself to our level. My father, William, cleared his throat, resting his heavy forearms on the table and leaning forward to assert his dominance. Your mother is absolutely right. We brought you here tonight out of charity. Do not order anything outside of the cheapest appetizer section. Bradley is footing the bill, and it is deeply disrespectful to take advantage of his generosity when you contribute absolutely nothing to society. I listened as the people who were supposed to love me stripped away my dignity in public. Keeping me in the role of family failure made their ordinary achievements feel enormous. 5 years earlier, I had lost the culinary education I fought to secure after my tuition money vanished from the account my grandmother created for me. That theft did not end my career. I worked in Chicago kitchens until a visiting Parisian chef noticed my discipline and palate and offered me a demanding apprenticeship overseas, with basic housing and meals. I spent 5 years working 100-hour weeks learning every station, then studying purchasing, payroll, branding, and restaurant finance after service. My family never asked where I worked or how I survived. They preferred the story in which Courtney was successful, and I remained their permanent cautionary warning at every single family gathering they controlled. Courtney picked up her wine glass, tapping her manicured nails against the expensive crystal. Honestly, Mom, I do not know why we even invited her. She is bringing down the entire aesthetic of the table. Look at her, staring at the menu like she has never seen truffles before. She probably thinks a Michelin star is a brand of tires for her beat-up car. Bradley chuckled loudly, slapping his heavy hand on the table. Good one, babe. Seriously, Alyssa, if you need to borrow $20 to hit the fast food drive-thru on your way back to whatever tiny apartment you are renting these days, just ask. We are a charitable family, after all. I kept my face completely blank, suppressing the powerful urge to laugh out loud. The menu they were looking at, the one with the gold foil lettering and the meticulously curated seasonal dishes, was a menu I had personally finalized 3 weeks ago. I knew exactly how much the white truffle cost, because I had negotiated the import contract with the supplier in Alba. I knew the precise temperature the Wagyu beef was seared at because I had personally designed the kitchen layout and purchased the equipment. I placed the menu down, gently smoothing my hands over my lap to maintain my composure. I am fine with what I am wearing, Courtney, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. And you do not need to worry about my budget, Bradley. I will manage my own expenses just fine. Linda rolled her eyes in frustration. Always so stubborn, always so resistant to accepting your reality. This is why you fail miserably, Alyssa. You have absolutely no humility. You walk into a magnificent place like Laura and act as if you belong here. You do not belong here. You never will. The atmosphere at the table was suffocating thick with their shared arrogance and my enforced silence. They ordered extravagantly, making a loud show of pronouncing the French and Italian names of the wines and dishes incorrectly. I ordered a simple salad, not because I could not afford anything else, but because I was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As we waited for the main courses, the restaurant hummed with the sophisticated energy of the Chicago elite. Professional waiters moved like graceful dancers, gliding seamlessly between tables with heavy silver trays. The warm, ambient lighting caught the gleam of crystal glasses and polished silver cutlery. My family was busy taking dozens of selfies, making sure to carefully position the Laura logo on the napkins so their social media followers would know exactly how wealthy and important they appeared. Then the heavy mahogany doors leading to the main kitchen swung open with a dramatic flourish. Out marched Chef Marco. He was a culinary legend in the city, a man known for his fierce temper and absolute unyielding perfectionism. He wore his pristine white chef's coat, tall hat, and an expression of deep, serious concentration. Behind him followed the executive sous chef, the head sommelier, and 3 senior servers carrying large silver-domed trays. The procession moved with military precision, bypassing tables filled with local politicians and wealthy socialites. They were heading directly for our private alcove. Courtney sat up straight, instantly adjusting her posture and aggressively fluffing her hair. "Oh my gosh," she whispered excitedly, grabbing Bradley's arm tightly. "That is Chef Marco. He is coming directly to our table. Bradley, you must have arranged something incredibly special for Mom's birthday." Linda beamed, her chest puffing out with immense pride. "Oh, Bradley, you absolutely shouldn't have. This is incredible." Even your father, William, looked thoroughly impressed, adjusting his silk tie and sitting taller in his chair to receive the famous chef. But the culinary procession did not stop in front of Bradley or my mother. The team halted directly beside my chair. Chef Marco, a man who rarely left the chaotic sanctuary of his kitchen, stepped forward and gave a deep, highly respectful bow. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at Courtney or William. He looked exclusively at me. "Ms. Alyssa," Chef Marco said, his booming, authoritative voice carrying across the quiet dining room. "Forgive the unexpected interruption to your evening, but we simply could not wait. The test dish for the new autumn tasting menu has been finalized. The smoked venison carpaccio with the black garlic foam, exactly as you conceptualized it last week. I needed you to be the very first to taste it. Is everything perfectly to your standard tonight?" The silence that descended upon our table was absolute. It was a thick, heavy silence, like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. My mother's fork hung suspended halfway to her open mouth. Bradley's smug, arrogant smile was frozen on his face, making him look completely absurd. Courtney's eyes were darting rapidly between me and the legendary chef, as if trying to process a mathematical equation that fundamentally broke the laws of reality. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water. I offered Chef Marco a warm, professional smile. "Thank you, Marco. The aroma is absolutely incredible. I trust your execution completely. Please leave the dish, and we will discuss the flavor profile thoroughly during our morning executive meeting tomorrow." Marco bowed again, his respect entirely genuine. "Of course, Miss Alyssa. Enjoy your evening." He snapped his fingers, and the servers placed the exquisite dishes on the table before retreating with synchronized perfection. For 10 long seconds, nobody at my table moved a single muscle. Finally, Courtney found her voice. It came out as a strangled, high-pitched squeak. She swallowed hard, trying frantically to regain her composure. "Why did he call you that? Why is the executive chef of Laura treating you like you are his boss?" I picked up my heavy silver fork, carefully selecting a piece of the venison. I chewed it slowly, savoring the brilliant explosion of flavors, the perfect, delicate balance of smoke and garlic. Only when I had swallowed completely did I look directly into my sister's panicked, wide eyes. I smiled. It was a calm, peaceful smile that contained 5 long years of hard-earned vindication. "Because I own this place," I said softly. "I am the sole owner and founder of Laura." The words hit them with the physical force of a freight train. Linda actually gasped loudly, pressing a shaking hand to her pearl necklace. William stared at me, as if I had suddenly grown a second head right there at the dinner table. Bradley let out a nervous, shaky laugh, looking around the crowded restaurant, as if waiting for a hidden camera crew to jump out from behind the velvet curtains. "That is entirely impossible," Bradley stammered, his face turning pale. "You are unemployed. You dropped out of school. You do not have 2 pennies to rub together. You cannot possibly own a multi-million-dollar restaurant in downtown Chicago." I wiped my mouth gracefully with the linen napkin. I dropped out of a traditional program because I secured an exclusive apprenticeship in Paris Bradley. I spent the last 5 years building a luxury hospitality group. Laura is simply my flagship property. The menu you were mocking me over the prices you were trying to use to humiliate me earlier, I created them all. You are sitting in my building, eating my food. The shock quickly morphed into aggressive, angry denial. My father, William, was a man who needed to dominate every single room he entered. The terrifying idea that his ultimate disappointment of a daughter held significantly more power and wealth than him was fundamentally unacceptable to his fragile ego. He slammed his heavy hand down on the table, rattling the expensive silverware and sloshing the wine. "Enough of this ridiculous nonsense," William growled, his face turning an angry shade of red. "I do not know what kind of sick, elaborate joke you are playing, Alyssa. Did you pay that chef to come out here and put on this little theatrical performance? Is this your pathetic, desperate attempt to make yourself look important because you are intensely jealous of your sister's massive success?" Courtney immediately latched on to this convenient theory like a drowning woman grabbing a life preserver. "Oh my gosh, that is exactly what she did." Courtney sneered, her cruel confidence rushing back. "You probably know someone who washes dishes in the kitchen and begged them to orchestrate this. How pathetic are you, Alyssa? To hire actors to humiliate your own flesh and blood on your mother's birthday?" Linda shook her head in deep, theatrical disgust. "I am appalled, Alyssa. Truly appalled. We bring you to a nice place, we generously offer to pay for your meal, and you stage this embarrassing, childish stunt. You have always been a liar, but this is an entirely new low, even for you." Bradley gestured aggressively to a passing server, snapping his fingers rudely. "Excuse me, bring us the check right now. And bring us the most expensive bottles of vintage wine you have to go. We are leaving immediately." "But guess what, Alyssa? Since you loudly claim to own this place, you can pay the bill. Let us see you prove your vast wealth." Bradley glared at me triumphantly, crossing his arms over his chest. "If you are the owner, paying a few $1,000s should be absolutely nothing, right? Or are you going to suddenly, magically remember that you left your wallet in your imaginary mansion?" The server returned minutes later, carrying a black leather folder. He placed it nervously on the table, sensing the intense hostility radiating from my family. Bradley snatched it open and laughed cruelly, his eyes shining with malice. $4,500. He slid the folder directly in front of me, aggressively tapping the paper with his index finger. "Go ahead, fake billionaire. Pay the bill. Show us all exactly how rich you are." They sat back, crossing their arms, wearing matching expressions of smug, eager anticipation. They fully expected me to break down crying right there, to admit it was all a lie, to beg them on my knees to cover the massive cost. They were practically salivating at the thought of watching me humiliate myself in front of the entire restaurant. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice or try desperately to convince them of the truth. I simply raised my hand and signaled elegantly for the general manager. He approached instantly, standing at strict attention beside my chair, his posture indicating total respect. "Yes, Miss Alyssa." I looked at my family, their smug, confident faces beginning to falter as they noticed the genuine deference the manager showed me. "Charge this entire table to the owner's account," I instructed, calmly, maintaining eye contact with my father. "And please make a permanent note in the security system. The 4 guests sitting with me are to be placed on our strict blacklist. They are no longer welcome to dine at La Aura or any of our affiliated hospitality properties ever again." The manager did not hesitate for a single second. He took the leather folder, bowing deeply from the waist. "Right away, Ms. Alyssa. I will update the security team immediately and have them escorted to the exit." My father's jaw physically dropped open. Bradley's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his thick skull. Courtney stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my charcoal dress. The very dress they had mocked, the dress that actually cost significantly more than Courtney's entire designer outfit. "Thank you for coming to my restaurant," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that echoed in the alcove. "Happy birthday, Mom. You always confidently said I would never amount to anything in this lifetime. I genuinely hope the $4,000 meal I just paid for gave you some serious food for thought. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor, leaving them sitting in stunned, paralyzed silence amidst the glittering lights of the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I had barely made it 10 steps toward the main dining room when the screech of a chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor echoed through the alcove. I paused, turning slowly on my heel. Courtney was standing up, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The smug, sophisticated facade she had worn all evening had completely evaporated, leaving behind the vicious, jealous bully I had known my entire life. She could not handle the reality that the sister she had mocked for 5 years was now standing light years above her in wealth, status, and power.
You think you can just walk away from us?
Courtney screamed, her voice hitting a shrill frequency that made several nearby diners flinch. You are nothing. This is a scam. You are a complete fraud, Elisa. She reached out blindly, her shaking hand closing around the stem of her half-empty wineglass. Before Bradley could even process what she was doing or attempt to stop her, she hurled the glass directly at the floor behind me. The delicate, handcrafted crystal shattered into 100 glittering pieces, sending dark red wine splashing across the pristine white tablecloth and the polished oak floor. The entire restaurant fell deathly silent. The soft jazz playing through the hidden speakers suddenly seemed terribly loud. Chicago elites, local politicians, and wealthy business executives all turned their heads to witness the spectacle. In the world of fine dining, an outburst like this was the ultimate social sin. I felt a brief flash of embarrassment, not for myself, but for the establishment I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building. But that fleeting emotion was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating business mindset. I was not a wounded little sister anymore, taking the abuse quietly to keep the peace. I was a chief executive officer, handling a highly disruptive patron. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell back or give her the screaming match she so desperately wanted. I simply looked at my general manager, who was already standing by with a radio earpiece. Code 4, I instructed, calmly maintaining my completely neutral expression. Remove them immediately. Bill the damages to the owner account, but ensure they are permanently banned from the premises. Within seconds, 4 large men in immaculate dark suits materialized from the shadows near the entrance. My security team was highly trained, consisting of former law enforcement officers who knew exactly how to handle unruly, high-profile guests with firm, quiet efficiency. They moved with absolute purpose, surrounding the alcove and effectively cutting off my family from the rest of the dining room. The head of security, a towering man named David, stepped directly in front of my father. "Sir, it is time to leave," David said, his voice low but leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "Please escort your party to the exit right now." William stood up, puffing out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the guard, just as he had intimidated me throughout my childhood. "Do not touch me," my father barked, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple with indignation. "I am a respected businessman in this city. I know the owners of the most powerful firms in Chicago. I will have your job for this disrespect." David did not even blink. His posture remained perfectly relaxed, but entirely unyielding. "Sir, you are currently trespassing on private property and causing a severe disturbance. If you do not walk out that front door under your own power right now, I will have the Chicago Police Department arrest you for disturbing the peace and malicious property damage. The choice is yours, but you have exactly 10 seconds to make it." Bradley, who always acted so tough and superior when he was putting me down, suddenly looked like a terrified child. The reality of police involvement and public scandal pierced right through his arrogant armor. He grabbed Courtney's arm, pulling her back as she continued to shriek incomprehensible profanities in my direction. "Stop it," Courtney Bradley hissed, sharp panic lacing his hushed tone. "Everyone is watching us. You are ruining my reputation." He cared significantly more about the prominent venture capitalist sitting 3 tables away witnessing this meltdown than he did about defending his wife's wounded ego. He was practically shrinking, trying to make himself invisible to the wealthy investors he spent his entire life trying to impress. Linda, meanwhile, had dissolved into loud theatrical tears, attempting to play her favorite role of the victimized matriarch. She clutched her designer purse to her chest, looking around at the wealthy patrons, hoping to garner some sympathy from the crowd. "My own daughter!" she wailed dramatically, turning toward a nearby table of startled diners. "My own flesh and blood is throwing me out onto the cold street on my 60th birthday. Can you believe the cruelty? She is a monster!" The diners simply turned back to their expensive meals, sipping their wine and ignoring her entirely. In this dining room, money power and decorum dictated respect, and my family had just publicly proven they possessed none of the above. They were acting like petulant children, throwing a tantrum in a place designed for sophisticated adults. The security team formed a tight professional perimeter around the 4 of them, effectively herding them toward the front entrance. Courtney dug her heels into the floor, trying to resist the momentum, but Bradley practically dragged her along, desperate to escape the judging eyes of the Chicago elite. He kept his head down, using his free hand to shield his face from the other tables. William marched ahead, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, muttering dark threats under his breath with every heavy step he took. I stood near the host stand, crossing my arms over my chest and watching them go. As they reached the heavy glass doors, William forcefully shoved past one of the security guards and turned back to look at me one last time. The absolute fury burning in his eyes was something I would never forget. His authority over me had been completely shattered, and he hated me for it.
"You are dead to us, Alyssa!"
He shouted, his voice echoing terribly in the elegant foyer.
"Do not ever try to come crawling back to this family when this little restaurant of yours goes completely bankrupt. We will not give you a single dime. I will be sure to keep that in mind,"
I replied, my voice perfectly steady and carrying clearly across the quiet room. "Have a wonderful night, William." The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the cool autumn air and the sound of Courtney's continuing erratic tantrums. The silence they left behind in the foyer was incredibly, deeply satisfying. It was the sound of a 33-year-old chain finally snapping. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling the toxic weight of their presence completely leave my body. I turned back to my staff, who were already efficiently cleaning up the shattered glass and spilled wine in the alcove, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The dining room was still slightly tense, the guests quietly processing the drama they had just witnessed. I knew exactly what I needed to do to regain control of the room and protect the pristine reputation of my business. I stepped fully into the main dining room, projecting an aura of total confidence. "I apologize for the unexpected disturbance this evening, everyone," I announced, my voice warm but commanding. "Please enjoy a complimentary dessert course and a glass of our finest vintage champagne on the house tonight to make up for the interruption. Thank you for choosing Laura." A ripple of polite applause and appreciative murmurs moved quickly through the restaurant. Glasses were raised in my direction, and the sophisticated hum of conversation instantly returned to normal. The crisis was expertly averted. The toxic, dark presence that had haunted my life for 3 decades had been both physically and symbolically removed from my sanctuary. I walked back toward the kitchen, feeling a powerful surge of adrenaline. I had just expelled the demons of my past, but I knew my family well enough to know this war was far from over. I bypassed the bustling kitchen entirely and made my way down the quiet, carpeted hallway that led to my private executive office. I closed the heavy soundproof mahogany door behind me, sealing away the ambient noise of clinking crystal and sophisticated chatter. My office was a sanctuary of dark Italian leather and polished walnut, a physical manifestation of the empire I had built from absolute zero. I walked straight to my desk and tapped the screen of my master security console. The high-definition camera feeds flared to life, displaying every angle of the restaurant. I clicked on camera 4, the exterior feed covering the valet parking area. The system was equipped with highly sensitive directional microphones, allowing me to hear everything happening outside in the crisp Chicago night air. My family was standing under the glowing awning, waiting for the valet to retrieve Bradley's leased luxury sedan. The cold autumn wind was whipping around them, ruining Courtney's perfectly styled hair and making her shiver violently in her thin designer dress. Stripped of the elegant restaurant setting and the captive audience, they were instantly turning on each other like starved wolves. "I cannot believe you just let her do that to us," William Courtney screamed, her voice sharp and frantic as she rounded on my father. "She humiliated us. She threw us out like common street trash. You are supposed to be the head of this family. Why did you not do something?" William paced back and forth under the awning, his face still dark red with unspent rage. "Do what exactly, Courtney?" he snapped, waving his heavy arms aggressively. "She had former cops ready to arrest me? She owns the damn building! How in the world does your worthless sister end up owning the most expensive piece of commercial real estate in downtown Chicago?" Bradley was standing near the curb, nervously checking his phone and avoiding eye contact with his furious father-in-law. He looked pathetic, shrinking into his tight suit jacket. "It has to be illegal," Bradley muttered, swiping at his phone screen. "There is no way she got that kind of capital legitimately. We need to hire an investigator. She probably scammed some rich old man into putting her name on the deed." Courtney spun around and directed her venom at her husband. "Shut up, Bradley! You are always talking about how smart you are with money, and you could not even figure out that my sister is a multimillionaire. We should have never taken that money if it was just going to buy us 5 miserable years. We are completely broke, and she is sitting on a gold mine." "Your father gave me that money to save my firm," Bradley shouted back, his defensive anger finally flaring up. "It is not my fault the commercial market crashed. It is not my fault your sister somehow struck gold while we are drowning in debt. Do not put this on me." Linda stood shivering near a heat lamp, clutching her purse and whining loudly. "Stop yelling at each other. My birthday is completely ruined. My friends are going to find out we got escorted out by security, and I will be the laughingstock of the country club." I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing monitor. Hearing them casually mention that money brought the memories crashing down on me like a physical avalanche. 5 years ago, I was not a powerful restaurant owner. I was a desperate, 28-year-old girl standing in the middle of their living room, clutching a printed bank statement that felt like a death sentence. My grandmother had left me a substantial inheritance when she passed away. It was exactly $150,000, locked in a custodial account that I was supposed to receive full access to upon completing my undergraduate studies. That money was my entire future. It was the tuition for the prestigious Le Cordon Bleu Culinary Institute in Paris. It was my housing, my food, my singular ticket out of a family that treated me like an unwanted burden. I had spent months preparing my application, passing the rigorous interviews and securing my spot. The day my acceptance letter arrived from Paris, I had cried tears of absolute joy. I immediately logged into the banking portal to transfer the deposit. I will never forget the cold, paralyzing terror that gripped my chest when the screen loaded. The account balance was 0. I had sprinted downstairs, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, and confronted my parents in the living room. William was reading a business journal, and Linda was casually flipping through a fashion magazine. When I slammed the bank statement onto the coffee table, demanding to know where my grandmother's money had gone, they did not even flinch. William had folded his newspaper, deliberately taking his time before looking at me with eyes so cold they could freeze water. "We needed liquidity, Lisa," he had stated plainly, devoid of any guilt or hesitation. Bradley's commercial real estate venture was facing bankruptcy. If his firm went under, he and Courtney would lose their house. Family comes first. We authorized the transfer to stabilize his accounts. I remember gasping for air, feeling like the floor was collapsing beneath me. That was my money. I had screamed the betrayal, tearing my vocal cords. Grandma left that specifically for my culinary education. "You forged my signature. You stole my entire future to bail out Bradley's failed business." Linda had scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, exactly the way she had done at the table tonight. "Oh, stop being so incredibly dramatic, Alyssa. Culinary school is a frivolous fantasy. You were just going to waste that money learning how to bake cakes. Bradley is doing real business. He needed the capital. You should be proud to help your sister maintain her lifestyle instead of being so fiercely selfish." When I threatened to call the police and report the massive fraud William had, stood up towering over me. His face had twisted into a mask of pure intimidation. "If you make one single phone call to the authorities, you will be dead to this family," he had roared, backing me toward the front door. "You are an ungrateful, useless disappointment. We put a roof over your head for decades, and this is how you repay us? Get out of my house!" They did not give me time to pack. They did not give me time to process the trauma. William physically shoved me out the front door into the freezing Chicago rain, tossing a single duffel bag of my clothes onto the wet pavement. He slammed the heavy oak door, locking it, and leaving me standing on the porch, with absolutely nothing. No money, no home, no family, and no way to pay for Paris. But the theft and the eviction were not enough for them. To cover up their massive financial crime, Linda immediately launched a vicious smear campaign across our entire extended family and social circle. By the next morning, my aunts, uncles, and cousins were blowing up my phone with angry messages. Linda had told everyone that I was a lazy, entitled dropout who had run away from home because I could not handle the academic pressure of culinary school. She spun a brilliant fictional narrative where she and William were the heartbroken, supportive parents, and I was the unstable, rebellious failure who had shattered their hearts. They destroyed my reputation to protect Bradley's ego and William's pride. They left me in the rain, convinced I would disappear. I used the $300 in my pocket for a hostel bed, work shoes, and transit while taking every kitchen shift available. Months later, a visiting French chef tasted a staff meal I prepared and offered me a Paris apprenticeship with meals and a room above the kitchen. I earned the airfare through overnight catering work. They never expected me to survive and accept it. I blinked, pulling myself out of the painful memory and focusing back on the security monitor. Outside, in the present reality, the valet finally pulled Bradley's leased car up to the curb. It was a flashy vehicle, but I knew from my wealth management advisors that Bradley was severely underwater on his payments. His business had never actually recovered from the crash 5 years ago. My grandmother's stolen money had merely delayed his inevitable financial ruin, serving as a temporary bandage on a massive, gaping wound. "Get in the car." Courtney Bradley snapped, roughly grabbing his wife's elbow and pulling her toward the passenger side. "Do not touch me!" Courtney shrieked, yanking her arm away. "I am calling my lawyer. Tomorrow, we are going to sue her for emotional distress. She cannot treat us like this." William aggressively yanked open the rear door, glaring at the valet, who was standing perfectly still, trying not to react to the screaming match. "This is not over," he growled, pointing a thick finger at the restaurant's glowing sign.
She thinks she has won because she has some money now, but I will tear this place down brick by brick. I will ruin her business, just like she ruined this night. I watched them pile into the car, slamming the doors with enough force to shake the vehicle. The sedan sped away from the curb aggressively, splashing through a puddle and disappearing into the Chicago traffic. I reached out and lightly tapped the screen, turning off the exterior feed. A slow, steady calm washed over my entire body. William thought he was going to ruin my business. Courtney thought she was going to sue me. They still believed they held some sort of power over my life because they were so completely blinded by their own narcissism. Removing them from my restaurant was not the grand finale. It was the first documented incident in a larger pattern. I had no intention of secretly buying Bradley's company or engineering a collapse unrelated to the dinner. I needed clean evidence and a defensible record. Their threats outside showed what would follow. They would attack my reputation, interfere with staff, and invent ownership claims because desperation had stripped away restraint. I called my lead corporate attorney. "Preserve every camera angle audio file and damaged item from tonight," I told him. "Serve written trespass notices and issue a litigation hold covering my brand, employees, vendors, and financial records. If they escalate, we answer with evidence, not emotion, and we will be ready before they finish making the mistake." The next morning I woke up at 5, exactly as I had every single day for the past 5 years. The penthouse was entirely quiet, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the sleeping city of Chicago below. But the peace of my morning routine was immediately shattered when I walked into the kitchen to start my espresso machine. My personal cell phone, which I kept strictly for emergencies and a very small circle of trusted contacts, was vibrating violently against the marble countertop. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications, lighting up so fast the device was actually warm to the touch. I picked it up, feeling a familiar cold dread creeping into my stomach. I had 52 missed calls and over 100 unread text messages. They were not from my executive team or my restaurant managers. They were from numbers I had not seen on my screen in half a decade. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and distant family friends who had happily ignored my existence when I was homeless were suddenly bombarding my phone with absolute venom. I unlocked the screen and clicked on a text from my Aunt Susan. It read, "How could you do this to your own mother? You are a disgusting, heartless monster. You do not deserve the success you have stolen." My brow furrowed. Stolen? I opened my social media apps, and the source of the digital avalanche became instantly clear. Linda had been busy. Instead of sleeping off the humiliation of being escorted out of my restaurant, my mother had stayed up all night crafting a masterful piece of fictional literature on Facebook. The post was thousands of words long, a sprawling, dramatic manifesto of maternal heartbreak and victimhood. She had tagged every single member of our extended family, ensuring maximum visibility. I stood at my kitchen counter, sipping my dark espresso, and reading the absolute lies she had published to the world. My heart is shattered into a million pieces today. Linda wrote her digital words dripping with manufactured sorrow. I went to a restaurant in downtown Chicago, hoping to enjoy a simple, quiet dinner for my 60th birthday with my loving husband and my eldest daughter, Courtney. Imagine my absolute shock and devastation when I discovered that the owner of this establishment was my youngest daughter, Alyssa, the same daughter who ran away from home 5 years ago, breaking our hearts and refusing to speak to us, despite our endless attempts to reach out and help her. I scoffed aloud at the sheer audacity of the lie. She had completely rewritten history, erasing the fact that they had stolen my inheritance and thrown me onto the street. But the post only got worse from there. Instead of a joyful family reunion, Linda continued, Alyssa decided to use her newfound wealth to humiliate us. She paraded her power around the dining room, treating us like garbage. When we tried to embrace her and celebrate her success,
She signaled her massive security guards to physically attack us. They grabbed my husband and dragged us out of the restaurant, throwing us onto the freezing street like criminals. She kept screaming that she was a millionaire now and we were beneath her. I have never felt such profound, agonizing pain. I failed as a mother. I raised a greedy, arrogant monster who cares more about money and fancy restaurants than her own flesh and blood. The post had already garnered hundreds of likes, angry reactions, and dozens of shares. But the comments section was where the real toxicity festered. The extended family, my parents, country club friends, and Courtney's wealthy social circle had formed a vicious echo chamber of outrage. My cousin Kevin, who had never once held a steady job, wrote, "I always knew there was something wrong with her. She was always so jealous of Courtney. Money really shows you who a person truly is. I hope her restaurant fails miserably." An old family friend chimed in, "Absolutely disgraceful behavior. You and William are saints, Linda. You gave her everything, and she repays you with violence. We are boycotting that restaurant immediately." The digital assault was coordinated and ruthless. My voicemail inbox was full of people screaming at me, demanding I issue a public apology and beg my mother for forgiveness. They called me an ungrateful brat, a sociopath, a fake billionaire who probably engaged in illegal activities to get where I was. They bought into Linda's narrative completely, without a single shred of hesitation or critical thought. For my entire life, Linda had controlled the family narrative, painting herself as the perfect, self-sacrificing matriarch. Now she was weaponizing that carefully cultivated image to destroy my business reputation. In the modern hospitality industry, public perception is absolutely everything. A viral post accusing a high-profile restaurant owner of physically assaulting her elderly parents on a birthday could trigger a massive public relations crisis. Cancel culture is swift and unforgiving. Linda knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to hit me where it would hurt the most: my empire. She wanted reservations canceled, she wanted negative press, she wanted to prove William's threat that they would tear my building down brick by brick. 5 years ago, this coordinated attack would have broken me. I would have collapsed on the floor, crying hysterically, begging them to stop apologizing for things I never even did, just to make the emotional pain go away. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a chief executive officer, and I recognized this for what it truly was: a desperate, pathetic, public relations smear campaign launched by a losing competitor. I did not cry. I did not reply to a single hateful text message or answer any of the furious phone calls. I walked calmly into my home office and booted up my primary computer. I took high-resolution screenshots of Linda's entire post, capturing every single defamatory comment, every share, and every vile threat sent to my personal inbox. I compiled them into a secure, encrypted folder. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel, my director of public relations and crisis management. He answered immediately, clearly already aware of the situation unfolding online. "Good morning, Alyssa," Daniel said, his tone sharp and professional. "I am tracking the Facebook post. It is gaining traction in several Chicago elite social groups. The narrative is highly damaging. Do you want me to draft a public response, immediately denying the allegations of physical assault?" "No, Daniel," I replied, pulling up the restaurant security feed from the previous night. "We do not respond to emotional blackmail with defensive statements. That just validates their desperate need for attention. I want you to pull the high-definition security footage from the main alcove and the valet parking area from last night. Extract the raw audio files as well. The directional microphones picked up every single word they said." Daniel paused, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. "You have them on tape, threatening you and causing the disturbance. I have Courtney throwing a crystal wine glass in a crowded dining room, I confirmed. I have William threatening my security staff. I have their entire conversation outside where they actively discuss the money they stole from my inheritance 5 years ago.
I have an ironclad digital record of their exact behavior.
Excellent, Daniel said, a predatory tone entering his voice. I will prep the files. Should we release them to the press to counter her narrative? Not yet, I instructed, leaning back in my chair. Never interrupt an enemy when they are busy making a massive mistake. Let Linda keep posting. Let the extended family keep leaving their hateful, legally actionable comments. They are publicly establishing a documented pattern of targeted defamation and libel against a commercial entity. I want my legal team to begin drafting a massive lawsuit for tortious interference and defamation of character. But we hold the lawsuit and the footage until the perfect moment. Let them think they are winning the public opinion war. Understood, Elisa. We will monitor and document everything. I will have the legal department ready to strike on your command. I hung up the phone, feeling a profound sense of icy control. Linda thought she could use social media to bully me into submission. She thought her digital tears would force me to surrender my power. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking blindly into a legal and financial trap of her own making. I poured myself another cup of espresso, looking out at the city skyline. My business was secure. My evidence was undeniable. I was completely untouchable. Just as I set my coffee cup down, my phone began to vibrate again. This time, it was not a distant cousin or an angry aunt. The caller ID displayed a number I knew by heart. It was my father, William. The digital smear campaign was just the opening barrage. Now it was time for the actual extortion. I took a deep breath, pressed the accept button, and put the phone on speaker, placing it squarely in the center of my mahogany desk. Let the games begin. The phone line clicked as the connection was established, and the heavy static of the cellular network filled my quiet executive office. I did not speak first. In the brutal world of high-stakes business negotiations, whoever breaks the silence first immediately surrenders their power. I leaned back in my Italian leather chair, steepling my fingers together, and stared at the glowing device on my desk. I let the dead air stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing him to make the opening move. Elisa Williams' voice finally boomed through the speaker. It entirely lacked the furious, unhinged rage he had displayed in the restaurant lobby the previous night. Instead, he had adopted his signature boardroom voice, a smooth, incredibly patronizing tone he typically reserved for cornering vulnerable business rivals or intimidating junior partners. I assume you have been monitoring the internet this morning. Your mother is deeply distraught. Her intense emotional pain has unfortunately spilled over into the public domain, and the backlash against your little establishment is growing by the minute. I maintained my absolute silence, letting the quiet stretch even further. I could practically hear his blood pressure rising through the phone. I am calling to offer you a strategic lifeline, he continued, his tone hardening as his attempt to intimidate me met a solid brick wall of indifference. You have created a massive public relations disaster for yourself. That arrogant stunt you pulled with your security team has severe consequences. The social media outrage is just the tip of the iceberg. But as a seasoned businessman, I understand that even the worst scandals can be effectively managed. I am willing to step in and convince your mother to delete her post. I will have her issue a public retraction stating it was all a terrible, emotionally charged misunderstanding. We can make this entire nightmare go away for you. And what exactly is the price for this generous crisis management, William I asked, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. Men like my father never offered anything without a heavy, extortionate price tag attached. William let out a low, condescending chuckle. He genuinely believed he had me backed into a corner. He thought the threat of cancel culture had terrified me into submission. It is not a price, Alyssa. It is a family compromise. We need to publicly demonstrate that this rift is healed. Next month is Courtney's and Bradley's 10th wedding anniversary. You will reserve your premier VIP private dining room for their celebration. You will provide your highest tier tasting menu, unrestricted access to your vintage wine cellar, and flawless service for 50 of their most important friends and business associates. It will be completely complimentary, of course. A grand public gesture of family unity to quiet the nasty rumors. I stared at the speakerphone, analyzing his transparent desperation. He wanted a free luxury party to help Bradley save face with his wealthy investors. But I knew my father. A free dinner, no matter how extravagant, was far too small a prize for a man with an ego that massive. A single, complimentary dinner party is not going to save Bradley's failing commercial real estate firm, William, I stated flatly, slicing right through his pretentious nonsense. A party does not generate liquid capital. Get to the actual demand. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The fact that I knew about Bradley's impending financial ruin clearly rattled him, but he quickly recovered. You always were too sharp for your own good, he growled, dropping the benevolent patriarch act entirely. Fine. A single dinner does not repair the structural damage you have caused this family. You built this restaurant. Yes, but you built it on the foundation of the elite upbringing we graciously provided for you. To ensure this public relations nightmare disappears completely and to secure our continued absolute silence moving forward, I have had my corporate attorney draft an operating agreement amendment. You will transfer a 20% equity stake in your restaurant group to a private holding trust managed by me. I actually smiled at the sheer, staggering audacity of the demand. They had stolen $150,000 of my rightful inheritance 5 years ago to bail Bradley out. Now that Bradley's firm was drowning again, they wanted to cannibalize 20% of my multi-million-dollar empire to use as collateral for their suffocating bank loans. It was a parasitic strategy, and it was entirely illegal. Let me ensure I am understanding you perfectly clearly, William, I said, making absolutely certain the recording software on my computer was capturing crystal clear audio of his exact words. You are formally offering to cease a coordinated digital defamation campaign against my commercial enterprise in exchange for goods, services, and a 20% equity stake in my limited liability company. Do not use your corporate legal jargon on me, little girl, William snapped, his arrogance blinding him to the massive legal trap he was currently stepping into. This is a family negotiation. You owe us for the decades we spent putting a roof over your head. Bradley's firm needs a legitimate, high-value asset to leverage for his next commercial bank loan, and your little restaurant group will serve that purpose perfectly. It is the absolute least you can do after treating your mother so horribly. You are the one who stole my culinary school tuition, William, I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial, freezing temperature. And what you are describing to me right now, over an unencrypted cellular network, is not a family negotiation. It is the textbook legal definition of corporate blackmail and felony extortion. You listen to me, you ungrateful brat! William roared, losing his temper completely. I play golf with the senior managing editor of the city's largest newspaper. I have personal contacts at 3 different local television broadcast stations. They would absolutely devour a primetime exposé about a narcissistic millionaire restaurateur who physically abuses her aging parents and leaves them completely destitute while pouring truffles on Wagyu beef for billionaires. I will destroy your reputation. Your reservations will plummet overnight. Your investors will panic and pull their funding. Your pathetic little Michelin star aspirations will turn to dust. I let his furious, heavy breathing echo through the speaker for a moment. He had played his final card. He had laid out his ultimate threat, expecting me to break down crying and beg him for mercy, just like I did when I was a helpless 28-year-old girl. You have until noon tomorrow to send me the signed equity transfer documents and the VIP anniversary booking confirmation, William dictated, his voice shaking with absolute malice. If my inbox is empty at 12:01, I am calling the news stations. We will destroy your entire life, Alyssa. I reached forward and rested my finger just above the end call button on the console. Call them, I said, my voice carrying the quiet, lethal weight of absolute certainty. Call every single reporter you know. Pitch them the story, William. I highly encourage it. Because when those news cameras start rolling, I am going to feed them a story so spectacular, so backed by irrefutable financial and digital evidence that it will bury you and Bradley permanently. Have a highly productive day and the satisfaction of a final word. I sat in the quiet of my office, the adrenaline pumping through my veins like ice water. William thought he was playing a game of public relations chess. He did not realize I had already flipped the board. The extortion attempt was now fully documented and securely stored on my encrypted server. They were going to escalate this war. They were going to try to ruin me using every dirty, underhanded tactic they possessed. But they were fighting a ghost of the girl I used to be. I picked up my phone and dialed my head of security. It was time to lock down the perimeter. The real battle for my empire was about to begin. David, I need you to reinforce the front doors and brief the entire host staff. I want faces matched against the blacklist immediately. I hung up the phone and turned my attention back to the dining room monitors. 2 days had passed since William's extortion attempt, and the silence from my family was deafening. It was a Friday night, the absolute peak of the Chicago Culinary Week, and my restaurant was operating at maximum capacity. The energy in the building was electric. A perfectly orchestrated symphony of clinking glasses, sizzling pans, and sophisticated conversation. I was reviewing the quarterly inventory reports when my general manager, Vincent, knocked sharply on my office door and stepped inside without waiting for a reply. His face was tense. Ms. Alyssa, we have a situation in the main dining room. I looked up sharply. What kind of situation, Vincent? He adjusted his suit jacket, clearly uncomfortable. It is your sister. She managed to bypass the host stand during the 8 o'clock seating rush. A party of 6 just left table 4, and before the bussers could even clear the linens, she and 5 other women simply sat down and refused to move. I pulled up the camera feed for table 4. Sure enough, Courtney was sitting right in the center of the plush circular booth, acting as if she owned the entire building. She was surrounded by 5 women dripping in designer jewelry and carrying handbags that cost more than most cars. They were the wives of the investors Bradley was desperately trying to court to save his failing commercial real estate firm. Courtney was using my restaurant to secure her husband's financial survival. Vincent sighed heavily. She flagged down our senior sommelier and demanded 2 bottles of the vintage Dom Perignon. She then ordered the Grand Seafood Tower, white caviar, and 6 prime Wagyu tomahawk steaks. She told the staff to keep the drinks flowing, because her sister owns the place and she has a blank check. I felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. Courtney thought she had found a brilliant loophole. She assumed I would never risk causing a massive public scene in front of Chicago elite, especially during the Friday dinner rush. She thought I would just quietly absorb the cost of a $10,000 meal to avoid the embarrassment of fighting with my own flesh and blood. She was severely miscalculating my tolerance for theft. Let them eat Vincent, I instructed, leaning back in my chair. Serve them exactly what they ordered. Give them the absolute best service Laura has to offer. But when they finish the dessert course, you bring me the bill. I will handle the presentation myself. 2 hours later, the bill had reached a staggering $12,400. Courtney had spared absolutely no expense, ordering aggressively to show off her supposed immense power to her wealthy friends. I watched on the monitor as they finished their gold leaf chocolate torts and began gathering their designer coats. It was time. I walked out of my office holding a sleek black leather folder. David, my head of security, fell into step immediately behind me, his towering presence a silent warning. The dining room was still packed, but I moved through the tables with quiet, purposeful grace. As I approached table 4, Courtney's friends were laughing loudly, clearly intoxicated by the vintage champagne. Courtney saw me coming, and a smug, triumphant smirk spread across her face. She leaned back, crossing her legs and waving her hand lazily in my direction. "Oh, look, girls," she announced, her voice carrying over the ambient noise. "It is my little sister, the owner. Come to make sure we had a fabulous time, Elisa. The food was decent, but the service was a bit slow. You really need to work on training your staff better." I stopped at the edge of their table. Her friends looked up at me, expecting a warm family greeting. I did not smile. I placed the black leather folder directly in front of Courtney. "I am so glad you enjoyed the tasting menu, Courtney. Your total for this evening is $12,420. We accept all major credit cards." Courtney's smug smile vanished, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, indignant rage. She pushed the folder back toward me aggressively. "Are you out of your mind, Alyssa? I am your sister. I am not paying a single dime for this. Put it on the family tab. I told my friends tonight was entirely my treat." Her friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting nervously in the plush velvet booth. The illusion of Courtney's unlimited power was already beginning to fracture. "There is no family tab," I said, keeping my voice calm enough for the neighboring tables to hear without turning the room into a spectacle. I opened the folder and placed the itemized receipt beside the seating record Vincent had printed for me. When Courtney forced her party into an uncleared booth, our staff had explained that the table was not complimentary. She had handed over her metal credit card for the same authorization hold required from any unscheduled, high-value party, and signed the electronic acknowledgement on the host tablet. The authorization did not pay the final bill, but it proved she had accepted personal responsibility for whatever she ordered. Courtney gave a brittle laugh and shoved the papers away. "I am your sister. I told them tonight was my treat because you own the restaurant. Put it on your account and stop embarrassing me." "Your promise to your friends does not create authority over my company," I replied. "You may pay the balance now or decline payment and leave. If you choose the second option, we will preserve the signed authorization, the camera footage, and your recorded statements, and submit a theft of services report to the Chicago Police Department. No one here is going to touch you or prevent you from walking out. You simply do not get to erase a $12,000 obligation by announcing that we share parents." David stepped to the side of the aisle rather than blocking it. The clear path to the exit made the choice painfully simple. Courtney could leave freely, but she could not leave anonymously. The reservation record identified every guest. Cameras had captured the orders, and the host tablet contained her signature. Vincent quietly placed the restaurant incident form beside the bill and entered the non-emergency police number into his phone without placing the call. One of Courtney's friends seized the paperwork and read the authorization line twice. Her face drained of color. "Courtney, you told us this was approved before we arrived," she said. "You used our names to take a table that was not yours, and now you expect us to be witnesses in a police report? Pay the bill, or my husband will withdraw every discussion he has ever had with Bradley's firm." The other women immediately agreed. None of them wanted their names connected to a deliberate refusal to pay at the most visible restaurant in Chicago. They had arrived expecting social prestige and instead discovered that Courtney had used them as props in a family attack. Courtney looked from the unobstructed exit to Vincent's phone and finally to the signature displayed on the tablet. Her anger had nowhere useful to go. "Run the card," she whispered. Vincent processed the final amount against the authorization she had already provided. The terminal requested confirmation because the total exceeded the original hold. Courtney entered her code with a shaking hand. A few seconds later, the receipt printed showing the transaction had cleared. I handed her the customer copy. "Thank you for settling the account," I said. "Your party is now required to leave, and the permanent trespass notice will be delivered through council tomorrow. Any future entry after notice will be handled by the police, rather than by a family conversation." Courtney snatched her coat and hurried toward the door. Her 5 friends followed without waiting for her and without offering a single comforting word. She had tried to use my restaurant to display power. Instead, she had proved that her status depended on promises she could not legally make and money her husband's business could not afford to lose. Courtney grabbed her coat and practically sprinted toward the exit, not even looking back to see if her friends were following. The 5 wealthy women scurried out after her, keeping their heads down and avoiding eye contact with anyone. I watched them go, feeling a deep, profound sense of victory. She had tried to steal from me to bolster her own pathetic ego. Instead, she had funded my business operations and publicly destroyed her husband's last chance at securing financial investors. The game was escalating exactly the way I had anticipated. An elegant sense of absolute control washed over me as I watched the email confirmation flash across my screen. I knew my family well enough to understand that absolute public humiliation would never result in their quiet surrender. It would only mutate into something much more desperate. Courtney losing her composure and her husband's cash in my dining room was a massive blow to their fragile egos. But Bradley was a cornered animal. With his commercial real estate firm bleeding capital and his wealthy investors actively pulling out after witnessing his wife's spectacular meltdown, he needed a target to blame. He needed to destroy my livelihood to distract from his own spectacular failures. I spent the weekend fortifying my operations, anticipating a retaliatory strike. It did not take long. The following Tuesday, Laura was hosting an exclusive private luncheon for 70 senior partners of a massive international law firm. The dining room was bathed in crisp afternoon sunlight, bouncing off the polished silverware and crystal water goblets. Chef Marco had designed a flawless 5-course daytime tasting menu, featuring wild-caught sea bass and delicate saffron-infused risotto. The service was flowing like a perfectly synchronized ballet. I was standing near the sommelier station, observing the floor with deep satisfaction, when the heavy glass front doors were suddenly thrown open with aggressive, jarring force. 4 people marched into the elegant foyer wearing stark official windbreakers emblazoned with the Chicago Department of Public Health logo. They carried heavy clipboards, thermal temperature guns, and expressions of grim, absolute authority. The lead inspector, a stern-looking woman with tightly pulled-back hair, bypassed my host stand entirely and marched directly into the center of the main dining room. Her heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor, shattering the sophisticated ambiance of the legal luncheon. "Who is the primary owner of this establishment?" she demanded, her voice carrying a sharp, aggressive volume that caused dozens of high-powered attorneys to immediately drop their forks and turn around. I stepped forward instantly, placing myself between the inspectors and my valued clients. "I am the sole owner," I stated, my voice radiating absolute, icy calm. "I am Alyssa. May I ask why you are storming into my dining room and disrupting a private corporate event?" The lead inspector did not lower her voice. In fact, she seemed to project it even louder, clearly intending to cause maximum panic among my guests. "We received an emergency anonymous tip early this morning regarding severe, critical biohazard violations on these premises. The informant provided highly detailed information about a massive rodent infestation and deeply unsanitary food handling practices in your primary kitchen. We are executing an immediate emergency inspection. If we find corroborating evidence, I am pulling your operating license and evacuating this building immediately." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the dining room. Several attorneys immediately pushed their plates away, reaching for their napkins and their briefcases. The mere mention of a rodent infestation was a death sentence in the luxury fine dining industry. It was a brand killer. Bradley had chosen his weapon perfectly. He knew he could not touch my finances or my legal standing, so he had decided to attack the one thing that mattered most: public perception and sanitation. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or act defensive. When you run a kitchen maintained to the exact rigorous standards of a surgical operating room, you do not fear health inspectors. I simply offered the woman a polite professional smile. "You are more than welcome to inspect every single square inch of my kitchen, Inspector," I replied, gesturing gracefully toward the double doors. Chef Marco runs a flawless facility. However, before you disrupt my staff during a crucial service, I would like to know what specific physical evidence prompted such an aggressive emergency response. Anonymous tips are often filed by disgruntled former employees or bitter competitors. The inspector crossed her arms, pulling a sealed, clear plastic evidence bag from her colleague's heavy equipment case. She held it up right there in the dining room. "Because our field agent found this exactly where the anonymous caller said it would be, lying directly next to your rear employee entrance and fresh produce delivery bay." Inside the plastic bag was a large, dead rat. More gasps echoed from the tables. My general manager, Vincent, took a sudden step forward, his face pale with horror, but I held up my hand to stop him. I stared at the plastic bag, and then I let out a short, genuine laugh. The absolute pathetic desperation of my family was almost comical. "Inspector," I said, projecting my voice clearly so every single powerful lawyer in the room could hear me. "Laura employs a state-of-the-art ultrasonic pest deterrent system alongside weekly preventative sweeps by a premium commercial sanitation firm. We have never had a single violation. What you are holding in your hand was not found inside my restaurant. It was planted outside my door to deliberately manufacture a crisis." The inspector frowned, her authoritative demeanor faltering slightly at my absolute, unwavering confidence. The tip was highly specific. "The caller claimed your staff routinely leaves refuse open and ignores pest control protocols." I turned to Vincent. "Please bring my primary security tablet right here to the sommelier station. Connect it to the main audio-visual display monitor behind the bar." Vincent moved with lightning speed, grabbing the tablet from the podium and plugging the high-definition feed directly into the large flat-screen monitor we used for corporate presentations. I tapped the screen, accessing the cloud-based security archive. My security system is equipped with military-grade night vision and motion tracking cameras covering every single inch of this property's exterior, I explained, tapping the screen to filter the timeline. "Let us review the footage of the rear delivery bay from last night, shall we?" The large screen flared to life, displaying a crystal-clear black-and-white image of the pristine alleyway behind the restaurant. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 in the morning. For a few seconds, the alley was completely empty. Then the sleek, familiar headlights of a luxury sedan pierced the darkness. The car pulled into the alley, stopping directly next to our locked commercial dumpsters. I zoomed in on the vehicle. It was Bradley's leased sedan. The license plate was captured in perfect high-definition clarity. The driver's side door opened. Out stepped a man wearing a tight, tailored suit. He looked around nervously, his head darting back and forth like a paranoid amateur criminal. He walked toward my rear employee entrance, holding a small, dark plastic bag. As he passed directly under the bright halogen security light, he paused to aggressively adjust the cuffs of his suit jacket. The bright light caught the unmistakable, brilliant flash of a heavy diamond bezel watch. It was the exact same obnoxious watch Bradley had been showing off at my mother's birthday dinner just a few nights prior. The dining room was completely silent, watching the monitor like a gripping legal thriller. The man on the screen scurried over to my delivery bay, opened the plastic bag, and unceremoniously dumped a dead rat onto the clean concrete right next to the door. He then practically sprinted back to his luxury sedan, peeling out of the alleyway and speeding off into the night. I paused the video, zooming in perfectly on Bradley's terrified, sweating face right before he threw the animal. I turned toward the lead inspector and indicated the frozen image on the screen. "That is Bradley, my brother-in-law," I said. "The vehicle registration matches the plate, and the unedited footage shows him carrying the same type of bag now in your evidence container." He entered the rear delivery area after business hours, placed the animal beside the door, and left. He had already been served with written notice that he was prohibited from entering the property. The inspector studied the image and then looked toward the bag her team had collected. Her expression changed from confrontation to professional caution. The footage did not end the inspection, and I did not ask her to abandon it. A planted animal outside the building still required a complete sanitation review because the restaurant had to prove the kitchen storage rooms and waste systems remained secure. "Please continue your inspection," I said. "My staff will provide temperature logs, pest control reports, delivery records, and unrestricted access to every food preparation area. I only ask that you preserve the bag, gloves, and chain of custody because the item may now be evidence of a false report and deliberate commercial interference." For the next 40 minutes, the department examined the kitchen dry storage walk-in, refrigerators, drains, refuse enclosure, and receiving bay. Chef Marco opened every log without hesitation. The inspectors found sealed ingredients, proper temperatures, current pest service documentation, and no sign of infestation inside the premises. The lead inspector completed a written report confirming that the restaurant met sanitation requirements and that the reported animal had been located outside in circumstances contradicted by the security recording. The attorneys at the private luncheon watched the process with growing respect. The senior partner who had joked about the rat raised his glass after the inspector signed the report. "Apparently, the only contamination today arrived in a leased sedan," he said, and the tension in the room broke into restrained laughter. The lead inspector handed me a copy of the findings. "Our department will preserve the item and refer the false report package to the city investigators," she said. "I cannot promise a particular charge or outcome. That decision belongs to law enforcement and prosecutors. But your footage, license plate data, and the caller's information will be included in the referral." "That is all I am asking," I replied. "I will have counsel transmit the original video through a verified evidence link and make the security administrator available for a sworn statement." The inspection team apologized to the luncheon guests for the disruption and left. With the evidence formally logged, I addressed the room only after the front doors closed. "Ladies and gentlemen, the inspection is complete and the written report confirms that Laura remains fully compliant," I announced. "Chef Marco will replace any course that cooled during the review, and the remainder of your luncheon is on schedule." The guests applauded, not because I had humiliated a city employee, but because the restaurant had responded to an accusation with records access and discipline. I returned to my office carrying the signed inspection report. I uploaded the report, the untouched camera export, the trespass notice, and the vehicle information to our secure legal portal. My message to counsel was precise: preserve the evidence, notify the city investigator, and prepare civil claims for trespass, defamation, and interference with business relations. Do not promise an arrest, and do not exaggerate the statute. Let the verified facts determine what happens next. The sabotage had failed because my operations were clean and my evidence was stronger than Bradley's anonymous story. He had tried to weaponize a public agency against me and had instead created a traceable record linking himself to the very object used in the complaint. I closed my laptop and let out a long breath. The biohazard stunt was an act of pure desperation, but William was not the type of man to surrender just because his son-in-law was about to be indicted. William preferred paper warfare. He believed that lawsuits and legal jargon could intimidate anyone into submission because that was exactly how he had bullied his business partners for decades. I knew he was preparing another strike. I just did not expect it to be so profoundly insulting to my intelligence. Exactly 2 days after the inspection, Vincent informed me that a man named Richard Vance was waiting at the front desk with a letter from my father. He described himself as counsel for William and Linda and threatened to seek an emergency order if I refused to meet him. I told Vincent to send him to the conference room rather than my private office, and to keep the security camera and audio notice plainly visible on the wall. Vance arrived in an inexpensive gray suit, carrying a scuffed briefcase and an exaggerated sense of authority. He placed a demand letter on the conference table. "This is formal notice of our intent to file suit over the intellectual property and family capital used to create Laura," he said. "My clients claim your signature dishes derive from recipes developed by Linda and your grandmother. They also claim the restaurant was launched with funds that should be treated as family property. Unless you transfer 20% of the restaurant group, they will seek an injunction, an accounting, and damages." I read the first page, without touching the draft equity agreement behind it. "A cease and desist letter is not a court order, Mr. Vance," I said. "It does not give you authority to stop service, and it does not create ownership where your clients have no documents." He leaned forward and attempted to recover his intimidation. "The recipes are family creations. Your mother taught you to cook, and your grandmother supplied the money that allowed you to pursue culinary training. A lawsuit will force you to disclose every menu development file and every investor contribution. The publicity alone could damage your brand." I opened the evidence binder my legal department had prepared after William's telephone threat. The first section contained the formation records for Laura Hospitality LLC, the capital contribution schedule, and 5 years of bank statements. Not $1 came from William, Linda Courtney, or Bradley. The second section contained the estate documents, showing that my grandmother's $150,000 bequest belonged to me and was transferred into Bradley's commercial holding account through a signature I disputed. Their attempt to describe stolen money as a family investment reversed the direction of the transaction. The third section addressed his recipe claim. A list of ingredients and ordinary cooking directions did not become exclusive property merely because a relative said the words "family recipe." What Laura actually protected was far broader and much better documented. The company owned registered trademarks for its name and visual identity. It maintained dated development notebooks, sensory data vendor specifications, plating manuals, and confidential production processes as trade secrets. Employees and consultants had signed non-disclosure and invention assignment agreements. The source code and original documentation for the flavor mapping software developed with our food science team were protected as company works, while the menu development timeline proved independent creation. I turned the binder toward him. "Here are the Paris apprenticeship records, here are the test kitchen timestamps, and here are the laboratory and vendor logs for every dish your clients claim to have invented. Linda cannot obtain a share of my company by announcing that she once cooked dinner in the same house where I grew up." Vance scanned the documents, and his posture visibly changed. He had expected an emotional argument about ownership. Instead, he was looking at a complete chain of creation and financing, supported by records his own clients could not contradict. I slid a second envelope across the table. "This is a litigation preservation notice prepared by my counsel," I explained. "Your clients must retain every draft, affidavit, message bank, record, recipe card, and communication used to support this demand. If they file allegations they know are false, we will seek dismissal sanctions, attorney fees, and damages for interference with the restaurant. Your professional obligations require you to investigate the factual basis before placing those claims in a pleading." He cleared his throat and said that his clients had assured him the family recipes were authentic. "Then ask them to produce the originals," I replied. "Ask for dates, photographs, ingredient lists, witnesses, and proof that any alleged material was confidential. Ask William to explain why the only traceable family money moved away from me and into Bradley's business.
If the answers are not supported, withdraw this demand in writing. Vance looked toward the camera notice on the wall, then back at the records. The cheap theatrical aggression left his voice. "I will review this with my clients," he said. "You will review it before filing anything," I corrected. "My attorney is available for a professional conference this afternoon. Until then, you may not contact my employees, vendors, or customers directly. Any attempt to frighten my staff into giving statements will be added to the harassment record." He gathered the unsigned equity agreement and placed it back in his briefcase. He did not run from the room, and I did not pretend I could invent an invoice for a meeting I had agreed to attend. The consequence was more serious than a dramatic bill. He left, knowing that a frivolous filing could expose his clients to sanctions and force the stolen inheritance records into formal discovery. After he departed, I sealed his letter in the evidence file instead of feeding it into a shredder. Destroying an opponent's demand would have served no purpose. Preserving it established another step in the documented campaign to take control of my company through threats unsupported by ownership records. William had tried paper warfare and failed because paper was my strongest territory. The pressure was beginning to fracture the family from inside, and the next useful evidence would come from the one relative willing to examine the numbers honestly. Before the meeting ended, I asked Vance one final question. Had he personally reviewed the estate ledger or spoken with the executor who controlled the inheritance account? He admitted that he had seen neither. William had supplied a one-page summary claiming that Family Resources financed my training. I showed him the authenticated transfer instruction bearing the disputed signature and the destination account owned by Bradley's company. The contradiction was not subtle. His proposed complaint accused me of taking family capital, while the only verified movement of money ran from my inheritance into the business his clients were trying to save. My general counsel joined by video and identified the specific relief we would seek if the demand became a filing. We would request an expedited document exchange limited to the alleged recipes, capital contributions, and trademark use. We would seek a protective order for trade secrets and ask the court to require William's side to identify every supposed recipe and every alleged payment before burdening the kitchen staff. If the facts failed their own preliminary disclosure, the sanctions motion would follow immediately. Vance closed the draft complaint. He was still representing hostile clients, but he now understood the professional risk of repeating allegations without inquiry. He agreed to direct all communication through counsel and to advise William that no equity discussion would occur. The scene ended without fantasy authority or a fabricated personal invoice. It ended with a lawyer leaving a preserved conference record and a deadline to withdraw claims that his evidence could not support. I was reviewing cost projections for a second location when my private phone displayed the name of my Aunt Beatrice. She had returned from Europe that morning, and her first words were not a greeting. "I have been through the estate file, Elisa," she said. "Linda lied to all of us. The executor confirmed that your inheritance was transferred to an account controlled by Bradley, and the authorization does not match the records surrounding your release of the funds. I confronted her less than an hour ago." Beatrice was my mother's older sister and a retired senior financial auditor. She had spent her career refusing to accept unsupported explanations, yet she had accepted Linda's version of my disappearance because it came wrapped in tears and family loyalty. Now she described the confrontation in exact chronological order. She had arrived at my parents' house with certified copies of the trust ledger, the receiving account, and the disputed transfer instruction. Linda first denied knowing anything. Then she called the theft a private family decision. Finally, she became furious when Beatrice said she would provide the documents to me and to counsel. "I wish I had called you before going inside," Beatrice said. "There was no witness, and I did not secretly record a private conversation. I know better than to create an eavesdropping problem while trying to expose financial misconduct." But she kept talking after I left.
A notification sounded on her end of the line. Beatrice told me Linda had just sent a 2-minute voice message. My mother believed she was leaving an angry private message for the sister who had challenged her. She had voluntarily created the recording herself. "Do not edit it," I said. "Save the original message with its date, sender information, and file metadata. Forward the complete audio to my attorney and keep the phone unchanged." Beatrice played the voicemail through the speaker. Linda's voice filled my office sharp and unapologetic. "So what if I moved the money?" she said. Bradley was about to lose everything, and Courtney would have lost the house and the country club life she deserved. Alyssa would have wasted the inheritance learning how to chop onions in France. I made the decision a mother was supposed to make. I protected the daughter who actually mattered. Alyssa lived under my roof for 28 years, and that money barely covered what she owed us. If she uses her restaurant to come after this family, I will tell everyone again that she stole the account and ran away. The message continued. Linda ordered Beatrice to stay out of the family finances and warned that William would ruin anyone who assisted me. She repeated the amount of the inheritance named Bradley's company and admitted that they had used my signature because I would never have approved the transfer. It was not a hidden recording made by someone else. It was a statement she had chosen to preserve in her own voice because arrogance convinced her the threat would frighten Beatrice into silence. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "I am sorry," Beatrice finally said. I believed her. When she told the family you had drained the account and disappeared, I accepted the story because questioning my sister felt disloyal. I should have examined the records 5 years ago. "You are examining them now," I replied. "What matters is what you are prepared to do with the truth." Everything required, Beatrice said. "I will sign a sworn declaration identifying the trust documents, the receiving account, and the conversation I had with Linda. I will give your attorney the original voicemail and my phone for forensic preservation. I will testify that the family narrative changed only after I challenged her with the ledger." That offer gave me something stronger than a dramatic secret recording. It gave me an authenticated admission supported by an independent witness and financial documents. I told her not to contact Linda again and not to warn anyone about the voicemail. My counsel would handle preservation and determine how it could be used. I also asked whether she would appear personally if my family repeated the same lies in a public forum. "I will stand beside the records," she answered. "I am finished protecting people who confuse blood with permission to steal." After we ended the call, my attorney opened a secure evidence intake link. Beatrice uploaded the original audio without converting it and photographed the message details on her phone. A mobile forensics specialist scheduled an imaging appointment, and the estate executor agreed to authenticate the transaction records. The evidence now had a chain of custody rather than existing as a copied sound file on my personal computer. Beatrice also authorized counsel to obtain the carrier records needed to confirm when the message was transmitted and received. That additional source did not prove the truth of every sentence, but it prevented Linda from claiming the file had been created months later solely for the gala or altered after delivery by my own legal team and investigators. I called Daniel only after counsel confirmed the materials were preserved. "Cancel my afternoon meetings and monitor the Autumn Harvest Charity Gala," I told him. "William and Bradley are advertising an event next week while using the Laura name. I want the venue invitation payment instructions and every public representation preserved. Do not manufacture a confrontation and do not promise me a stage. Find out what they are actually doing and coordinate with legal." Daniel said his team had already seen invitations circulating among Chicago donors. He would obtain a legitimate ticket through our counsel, identify the organizers, and verify the charity registration. "If they are using my brand to solicit money," I said, "then I will correct the record in the same room where they make the claim. This time the response will be supported by documents, a sworn witness, and a confession," Linda recorded with her own voice. Beatrice then sent a second file the executor had given her. It was a bank confirmation generated on the morning of the transfer. The receiving account name was not hidden behind an unfamiliar number. It identified Bradley's commercial holding company and listed William as the person who delivered the instruction. A handwritten internal note stated that the bank employee had requested direct confirmation from me, but was told I was traveling without access to a telephone. 5 years earlier, that lie had allowed the transaction to pass without the scrutiny it deserved. My attorney arranged separate interviews so Beatrice and the executor would not unconsciously shape each other's memories. Beatrice described the confrontation from her own recollection before listening to the voicemail again. The executor described the account rules transfer request and later questions without being told what Linda had said. Their independent accounts matched the documents. That separation mattered because I did not want a dramatic family alliance that could be dismissed as coordinated revenge. We also preserved the context of Linda's message. The original file remained on Beatrice's phone. A forensic copy recorded the creation time duration sender account and cryptographic hash. Counsel prepared a transcript but marked it as a working aid rather than a replacement for the audio. No sentence was cut together, and no background noise was removed. If the recording appeared at the gala, the audience would see where it came from, and investigators would still possess the untouched original. Beatrice asked whether I planned to sue immediately for the stolen $150,000. I told her the civil claim was already being evaluated, but the first priority was preventing further dissipation and correcting the public lie. A rushed complaint might give William time to destroy records or transfer assets. My counsel would seek preservation first, then decide whether restitution belonged in probate civil court or the broader financial investigation. For the first time since the birthday dinner, I felt the family structure shift for a reason other than fear. Beatrice had not joined me because I was rich or because public opinion favored me. She joined because the ledger proved a theft, and integrity required her to stop protecting the person who committed it. That distinction made her the first blood relative I was willing to trust with a place in the truth. I ended the call with Daniel and immediately shifted my focus to the massive logistical puzzle sitting on my desk. The charity gala was still a week away, but a much more immediate operational challenge was looming over my empire. Chicago Restaurant Week was scheduled to begin in exactly 48 hours. In the luxury fine dining sector, this was not merely a promotional event. It was an absolute bloodbath of culinary excellence, a brutal 10-day marathon where the city's elite critics, wealthy tourists, and aggressive food bloggers descended upon the top establishments to judge, rank, and consume. Lara was the crown jewel of this year's lineup. We were completely fully booked, holding a waiting list thousands of names long. The pressure on my kitchen staff was astronomical, and any disruption to our supply chain or personnel would be absolutely catastrophic to our momentum. The charity gala was still a week away, but Chicago Restaurant Week would begin in 48 hours. I was finalizing seafood import schedules when Chef Marco entered my office, carrying a sealed brown canvas bag by its handles. He placed it on the visitor table rather than on my desk. A woman identifying herself as Courtney approached me in the rear alley 20 minutes ago, he said. She offered this money if I abandoned the kitchen before Restaurant Week and attempted to persuade other chefs to leave with me. The bag contained $50,000 in banded cash. Marco had not opened the bundles or mixed the money with anything belonging to the restaurant. The moment Courtney appeared, he activated the safety recording feature on his phone because the alley carried a posted notice that audio and video monitoring protected the employee entrance. Our fixed cameras had captured the encounter from 2 angles. He played the recording. Courtney accused me of stealing the restaurant and warned Marco that federal agents were supposedly preparing to raid the kitchen. Then she described the payment clearly. The money would be his if he called in sick, resigned without notice, and convinced enough senior staff to leave that service collapsed during Restaurant Week. Marco gave her one neutral sentence. "Leave the bag and I will review the proposal with counsel." He never promised to accept the bribe or perform the requested act. Courtney set the bag on the pavement, stated that the cash came from selling jewelry and borrowing against her car, and walked away. I looked at Marco. "Your loyalty was never for sale," I said. "Neither was my judgment," he replied. "I have an executive contract, profit participation, and years of work invested in this kitchen. $50,000 would not compensate me for destroying my name or betraying 30 people who trust me." That answer also resolved a quiet inconsistency in the way my family imagined the company. I remained the sole owner of Laura. Marco was not secretly holding an equity stake that contradicted my ownership records. His compensation rewarded performance without transferring control of the restaurant. I called our attorney from the office speaker and described the bag without touching the contents. She instructed us to close the room, preserve the camera footage, and contact a city investigator. 2 officers arrived with an evidence technician. They photographed the bag, where Marco had placed it, counted the sealed bundles in our presence, and documented the serial ranges. The cash was taken into evidence custody while its source was traced. No one distributed the money to employees, and no one treated attempted sabotage as an anonymous charitable donation. Using the cash for payroll would have converted evidence into restaurant revenue and given Courtney an argument that we had accepted her proposal. Instead, I authorized a separate Restaurant Week bonus from Laura's operating account and made the source explicit in the payroll records. The staff gathered in the prep kitchen while I explained only what they needed to know. A competitor had attempted to interfere with staffing. Marco had reported it immediately. Security protocols were being increased, and every employee who completed the Restaurant Week schedule would receive a company-funded bonus. I did not display the seized cash or turn the investigation into entertainment. The response from the team was stronger than any staged photograph. Sous chefs volunteered to cover emergency stations. Line cooks confirmed their schedules. Vendors agreed to use verified delivery contacts. The attack Courtney intended to create division instead strengthened the kitchen because transparency removed the rumor before it could spread. Later that afternoon, my attorney sent Courtney a preservation and no contact notice. It stated that the cash and recording had been transferred to investigators, that any claim for return had to be made through counsel, and that direct contact with Marco or other employees would be treated as further interference. The letter did not call the money a donation and did not threaten a predetermined criminal charge. Courtney called from a blocked number less than an hour later. Her voice was raw with panic. "Give it back, Alyssa. That was everything. I sold my jewelry and borrowed against the car because Bradley needs a bankruptcy retainer. I cannot lose $50,000 over one conversation." "The money is in evidence custody," I replied. "I cannot return it, and I cannot spend it. Your attorney can communicate with the investigator. You chose to carry cash into a monitored commercial alley and offer it in exchange for disabling my kitchen." She began crying and said Bradley did not know what she had done. The bank was threatening the house, and she had believed Marco would take the offer because everyone had a price. "That belief is the problem, Courtney," I said. "You still think loyalty is purchased the way your parents purchased silence with my inheritance. Marco reported you because his career and integrity are worth more than your cash." She asked me to call the investigator and describe the exchange as a misunderstanding. I refused. The evidence would remain untouched, and the authorities would decide what action followed. Her immediate loss was not a revenge bonus deposited into my payroll. It was the fact that the last liquid money she controlled was now inaccessible because she had used it as an instrument of sabotage. "You have millions," she said. "You could replace it for me and nobody would be hurt." "I will not finance the repair of an attack against my own business," I answered. "Contact your lawyer and do not contact my employees again." I ended the call and blocked the number. Marco returned to the kitchen. Restaurant Week opened on schedule, and every station was fully staffed. Courtney had attempted to purchase a collapse and instead created a documented case showing how far the family was willing to go when intimidation failed. The next morning, Daniel entered my office carrying a heavy gold invitation. The family had already moved to its final plan. The security export showed how carefully Courtney had planned the approach. She parked beyond the delivery camera she knew about, but walked directly beneath a newer unit installed after Bradley's rat stunt. She wore gloves while carrying the bag, yet removed one to unlock her phone and display photographs of Marco entering the restaurant. The recording captured her saying she knew his home address and could introduce him to investors if he helped her. What she called an opportunity sounded increasingly like pressure. Marco explained that he had taken the bag only after recognizing that leaving it in the alley would risk its removal by a stranger and destroy the evidence trail. He carried it by the handles, placed it in an empty locked office, and called David before coming to me. Access logs confirmed that no one opened the room during those minutes. His careful actions gave the evidence technician a clean history from the moment Courtney abandoned the money. The investigator asked whether the company wanted to make an immediate criminal complaint. My attorney answered that we would provide facts and cooperate, but would not demand a particular charge. The legal classification depended on intent, source of funds, and the exact words recorded. We signed property receipts and retained copies of the serial number inventory. The camera files were exported in their original format, along with the system audit log, showing that timestamps had not been altered. I met with department heads after the staff briefing. Marco designated 2 qualified sous chefs who could command service if illness or an emergency removed him from the line. Vincent revised guest access controls. David required vendors and temporary workers to use photo credentials during restaurant week. The attack exposed a genuine operational vulnerability, dependence on a single leader, and we corrected it instead of merely celebrating Courtney's failure. The separate bonus I funded was calculated through payroll, with taxes and written performance criteria. Every employee understood that the reward came from successful preparation, not from seized evidence. That distinction protected the books and reinforced the culture I wanted. Laura would never answer financial misconduct by creating another unexplained cash transaction. During Courtney's call, she admitted that the money came from 3 sources. She had sold several pieces of jewelry borrowed against her vehicle and withdrawn the last cash reserve Bradley had kept outside the company accounts. She begged me not to disclose that detail because he believed the reserve still existed. I did not promise secrecy. Her statement became another preserved communication for counsel, but I refused to use it as blackmail. "You can tell him yourself," I said. "I will not threaten you with the truth, and I will not lie to protect you from it. The investigator will determine whether the cash is returned restrained or applied to restitution. That decision is no longer controlled by either of us." Courtney accused me of stealing the bag. I reminded her that a signed evidence receipt identified the agency holding it and gave her attorney's contact information. She could challenge the custody through lawful channels. What she could not do was demand that I secretly replace funds after she used them to purchase the destruction of my kitchen. After the call, Marco sent one message to the culinary team. "Service begins at 4. We cook together." No one discussed Courtney in the kitchen after that. By opening night, every station was ready, and the first tasting menu left the pass exactly on time. Her sabotage failed not because I created a clever social media photograph, but because professionals followed procedure and kept working. The invitation announced the Autumn Harvest Charity Gala and claimed $10,000 tables would support underprivileged culinary students. At the bottom, William and Linda identified themselves as founding patrons and honorary advisors of the Michelin-recognized Laura Restaurant Group. Daniel had verified that the named foundation was not listed as a tax-exempt organization and was not registered with the Illinois Attorney General's Charitable Trust Bureau. The payment instructions directed donors to an account controlled by a company connected to Bradley's commercial real estate business. Our first step was not to let unsuspecting guests lose money for the sake of a dramatic reveal. Council sent a formal demand requiring the organizers to stop using the Laura name and preserve all solicitation records. At the same time the evidence package went to the Illinois Attorney General, the IRS referral office and federal investigators already reviewing Bradley's financial activity. The agencies, not I, decided whether monitoring should continue. 2 days later, investigators authorized a controlled transaction using funds placed in a protected account. The payment moved through the exact online portal printed on the invitation and landed in the commercial account described by Daniel. The funds were immediately restrained, so Bradley could not spend them. That single supervised transfer preserved the electronic route without exposing an innocent donor to loss. The family ignored the cease and desist. They continued printing banners accepting reservations and describing donations as tax-deductible. Their refusal established that the misuse of my brand was deliberate rather than a misunderstanding. Daniel obtained a table in the name of Loris outside council. My attendance was disclosed to the investigators and the venue. A videographer documented the public representations, while agents remained outside the ballroom, prepared to preserve payment devices and records after the presentation. I was not creating a crime or instructing anyone to solicit money. I was entering an event that was already using my company's identity and allowing the organizers to speak for themselves. During the week, I continued managing Restaurant Week, while legal teams assembled the trademark records, the Cook County injunction, the authenticated voicemail, and the controlled payment trace. By Saturday, every document had a source and every agency understood its role. I chose an emerald gown rather than the understated dress from my mother's birthday because I was no longer attending as a silent relative. I was appearing as the owner whose name had been placed on every wall without permission. The event would not end with private security locking guests inside or with me ordering an arrest. It would end with a public correction, followed by investigators acting under their own legal authority. Council also notified the venue and its payment processor that the Laura mark was disputed and that records must be retained. The venue chose not to cancel because investigators wanted the advertised representations documented in real time, but it segregated any new receipts and posted no endorsement of the supposed charity. Guests who had already paid were contacted confidentially and advised not to make additional transfers until registration could be verified. Aunt Beatrice agreed to attend with her lawyer and remain outside the ballroom unless her declaration was challenged. Her presence ensured that my family could not dismiss the voicemail as a file I invented. The executor remained available by telephone to authenticate the trust ledger if investigators requested it. Every dramatic item on my presentation had a witness document and custodian behind it. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur of intense, meticulous preparation. While I managed the incredible chaos and triumph of Chicago Restaurant Week, successfully serving thousands of ecstatic guests and securing glowing reviews from the city's toughest critics, I was simultaneously orchestrating my family's total destruction. My legal team was working overtime, coordinating quietly with forensic accountants to map out exactly how Bradley's firm was structured. We traced every single fake charity account right back to his underwater commercial properties. When Saturday evening finally arrived, I did not wear the simple, understated charcoal dress I had worn to my mother's birthday. Tonight was not about blending in. Tonight was an execution, and I dressed accordingly. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green gown that swept the floor, paired with diamonds that I had purchased myself with my own legitimately earned wealth. I looked powerful, untouchable, and incredibly dangerous. The gala was being held at a historic ballroom downtown, a venue known for turning a blind eye to questionable booking credentials as long as the massive deposit cleared. When David Clean, my head of security, and I arrived at the entrance, the sheer, tacky desperation of the event was immediately apparent. They had plastered the Laura logo illegally, of course, on every available surface. Cheap ice sculptures melting rapidly near the coat check were carved into the shape of chef's hats. The servers, hired from a discount temp agency, were pouring mid-tier sparkling wine into glasses while desperately trying to pass it off as vintage champagne. It was an offensive, cheap imitation of luxury, a desperate charade orchestrated by people who understood the price of everything, but the value of absolutely nothing. I slipped into the ballroom while the lights were dimmed, avoiding the main receiving line where Linda and William were holding court. I made my way to the VIP table Daniel had secured, right at the edge of the dance floor. The shadows concealed my identity perfectly. From my vantage point, I had a flawless view of the entire pathetic operation. Linda was floating through the crowd wearing a gown that looked suspiciously like a high-end rental. She was holding a glass of cheap wine and laughing loudly, aggressively touching the arms of prominent bankers and real estate tycoons. Oh yes, our daughter Elisa relies heavily on our culinary guidance, Linda boasted to a group of wealthy tech investors, her voice carrying over the mediocre string quartet playing in the corner. William and I are the primary creative force behind Laura. We instilled that strict work ethic in her. It is so exhausting managing such a high-profile restaurant, but we do it out of pure love for the Chicago dining scene. That is why we are asking for your generous donations tonight, to help the next generation of chefs achieve the success we built for our family. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. Chefs achieve the success we built for our family. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling absolutely zero emotion. It was fascinating, in a deeply morbid way, to watch her lie so effortlessly. She had convinced herself of her own fictional reality. She genuinely believed that because she had given birth to me, she owned my success, my brand, and my money. On the other side of the room, Bradley was sweating profusely. He was cornering older, vulnerable philanthropists, holding an electronic payment terminal, and aggressively pushing them to make immediate, maximum donations. His hands were shaking slightly. He knew the bank was coming for his properties on Monday. He needed hundreds of thousands of dollars tonight, just to keep the lights on in his empty office building. Courtney was nowhere to be seen. Her humiliating defeat in my alleyway had apparently broken her spirit completely, keeping her hidden away in her heavily mortgaged suburban house. She was the only smart one among them, recognizing that the game was already over. The lights in the grand ballroom flickered and dimmed, signaling the beginning of the main presentation. A spotlight hit the center stage, illuminating a large digital projector screen displaying my stolen restaurant logo. William strode up to the microphone, adjusting his tie and projecting the arrogant, commanding aura he had used to terrorize me throughout my childhood. "Ladies and gentlemen," William announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for joining us tonight. As the founding patrons of the Laura Hospitality Group, my wife and I understand the intense, grueling dedication required to succeed in the culinary arts. We built our family empire on trust, loyalty, and massive financial investment. Tonight, we are asking you to open your checkbooks and wire your generous, tax-deductible donations to our foundation. Help us ensure that the Laura legacy of excellence continues to support those in desperate need." The audience began to politely applaud, reaching into their tailored jackets for their checkbooks and smartphones, ready to authorize the massive wire transfers that would save Bradley's fraudulent business. I set my water glass down on the table. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. I looked at David, who was standing perfectly still in the shadows right behind my chair. I nodded once. David immediately tapped his radio earpiece, signaling Daniel, who was stationed secretly in the venue's audio-visual control room. The trap was armed. The bait had been completely swallowed. It was time to drop the hammer. The harsh screech of audio feedback suddenly tore through the grand ballroom. William winced, pulling the microphone away from his mouth. Before he could tap the metal grate to test the connection, the entire sound system went completely dead. the cheap string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing, their bows freezing mid-air. A split second later, the massive digital projector screen behind my father glitched violently. The stolen golden logo of my restaurant vanished into a sea of erratic digital static. Then the main house lights snapped on blazing with aggressive fluorescent intensity. The cheap, romantic ambiance of their fake gala was instantly destroyed, exposing the scuffed hardwood floors and the rented polyester tablecloths in harsh, unforgiving detail. I stood up from my chair at the VIP table. Daniel hit a switch in the control room, and a single, blinding white spotlight swung across the high ceiling, snapping directly onto my emerald green gown. I was no longer hiding in the shadows. The heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone caught the bright light, sending brilliant, shattered reflections across the nearest tables. The quiet murmurs of the wealthy crowd instantly died down as hundreds of eyes turned to look at me. I walked calmly up the center aisle, my high heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. The crowd parted seamlessly, allowing me to approach the main stage. I saw the exact moment recognition hit the elite guests. These were billionaires, venture capitalists, and prominent politicians who frequently dined in my private alcoves. They knew exactly who I was. William stared down at me, his face rapidly draining of color. He gripped the dead microphone, his knuckles turning white.
What are you doing?
He hissed, his voice barely carrying over the edge of the stage.
Security, get her out of here right now!
No one moved. My own security team, commanded by David, had already quietly relieved the venue's amateur bouncers at the main doors. I stepped up the side stairs and walked directly onto the center of the stage. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Linda, who was standing frozen near the podium, clutching her rented gown. I reached into the folds of my dress, pulled out a sleek wireless microphone, synchronized to my own secure audio channel, and turned to face the audience.
Good evening, Chicago,
I announced, my voice echoing with crystal-clear acoustic perfection through the massive ballroom. My name is Alyssa. I am the sole owner, founder, and chief executive officer of the Laura Restaurant Group. A wave of shocked, surprised whispers washed over the crowd. Powerful men and women who had just been reaching for their checkbooks paused, looking from me to my sweating father in absolute confusion. I am standing before you tonight because a massive, severe financial crime is currently taking place in this very room. I continued pacing slowly across the stage, owning the space with absolute authority. I need to make one fact abundantly perfectly clear to every single investor and philanthropist sitting in this audience. Laura Restaurant has absolutely no connection to the people standing on this stage, nor to the fraudulent charity they are aggressively pitching to you tonight. William lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure, desperate rage.
Turn her microphone off,
he roared, waving his arms toward the control booth.
She is lying. She is an unstable, disgruntled child trying to ruin a charity event.
I did not even flinch. I simply raised my free hand and snapped my fingers. Daniel executed the command, and the stolen restaurant logo disappeared from the screen. In its place appeared a certified order from the Circuit Court of Cook County. The temporary injunction did not claim that a federal judge had created a dramatic 1,000-foot exclusion zone. It stated something more precise and enforceable. William Linda Bradley and their agents were prohibited from using the Laura name, logo, menus, or claimed affiliation in solicitations, and from entering Laura property after prior trespass notices. The order also required preservation of records connected to the birthday confrontation, the false health complaint, and the attempted employee inducement. These people are not founders, patrons, or advisors to my restaurant, I told the audience. They received this order before tonight and continued using the brand anyway. Their presence on this stage does not create a relationship with my company. It documents their decision to ignore court directive. The venue had received the same certified order and had preserved the banners and invitations rather than accepting the family's claim at face value. Linda, realizing her entire fake social standing was evaporating in real time, rushed forward. She grabbed the edge of the podium, her eyes wild and frantic. "Do not listen to her," Linda shrieked, her voice echoing terribly without a microphone. "She is an ungrateful monster. We gave her everything. We funded her entire life. We built her success with our own money and our own endless sacrifices. She is a liar." I turned my head and looked at my mother. I felt a surge of cold, clinical detachment. She was still trying to gaslight me in front of hundreds of people. She was still trying to play the ultimate victim. "You claim you built my empire with your love and your tremendous financial support," I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, razor-sharp whisper that carried perfectly through the silent ballroom. "Let us hear exactly how you supported me, Linda. Let us show Chicago your true maternal sacrifice." I nodded toward the control room. The injunction disappeared, and an audio file identification screen replaced it. It displayed the original message date sender number file hash and the declaration signed by Aunt Beatrice. Linda had not been secretly recorded during a private conversation. The voice the audience was about to hear came from a message she had deliberately created and sent herself. The ballroom speakers carried my mother's unmistakable voice. "So what if I moved the money?" she said. "Bradley was about to lose everything, and Courtney would have lost the life she deserved. Alyssa would have wasted the inheritance learning how to chop onions in France. I made the decision a mother was supposed to make. I protected the daughter who actually mattered. We used Alyssa's signature because she never would have agreed." The file continued long enough for the audience to hear the amount the receiving company and Linda's threat to repeat the lie that I had emptied the account. Daniel then stopped it, rather than replaying the entire family argument. Behind the audio stood the trust ledger, the transfer record, and Beatrice's sworn declaration. The audience was not being asked to convict anyone from a dramatic sound clip. They were being shown that the public story about my inheritance was contradicted by a voluntarily recorded admission and independent financial evidence. Linda gripped the podium as the room turned away from her. For the first time, she could not claim that my version depended only on memory. Beatrice stood near the investigator's table with her attorney and confirmed that the file on the screen was the original message received on her phone. Near the rear of the stage, Bradley moved toward the side door. David did not block the exit or announce that nobody was allowed to leave. He stepped aside and kept the path clear, while two investigators positioned in the service corridor observed Bradley depart. Their job was to preserve evidence and follow the authority of their warrants, not to serve as actors in my presentation. I returned the audience's attention to the screen. A charity registration search appeared beside the invitation payment instructions and the trace from the controlled transaction. "The Chicago Culinary Hope Foundation, named on your invitations, is not recognized as a tax-exempt charity and is not registered to solicit donations in Illinois," I said. "The payment portal did not send money to a scholarship account. A transaction supervised by investigators followed the funds into an account controlled by an entity connected to Bradley's distressed real estate business. That payment has been restrained, and no donor money needs to disappear for this evidence to exist." The guests began checking their phones and payment confirmations. Daniel displayed a contact number established by investigators, so anyone who had already submitted money could report the transaction and seek to stop or reverse it. I did not accuse the audience of becoming participants in tax evasion merely because they had been deceived. They were potential victims and witnesses. "If you intended to support culinary students, keep your money in your account tonight," I continued. "The name Laura was used without permission, and the promised charitable status has not been substantiated. My company has no relationship with this event." William tried to regain the microphone and called the controlled payment a trick. I answered by displaying the cease and desist letter delivered before the gala and the signed receipt confirming service. They had been given the opportunity to correct the invitation and chose to continue. I faced my father without raising my voice. You told me my work would never matter because I refused to fund the people you favored. You took my inheritance and then tried to take the business I created after surviving that theft. My success does not belong to this family, and my company will not be used as collateral for another failed venture. I stepped down from the stage while the audience withdrew pledges and photographed the records. Outside the ballroom, investigators served preservation demands on the event organizer and secured copies of the payment terminal's guest list contracts and account instructions. Those actions were based on agency authority and evidence gathered before I arrived. Private security did not hold my parents on the stage, and I did not order anyone placed in handcuffs. The family remained inside, surrounded by donors demanding explanations. Their public standing collapsed without a staged arrest because the people they had tried to impress now understood that the gala had been built on an unauthorized brand and a misleading payment route. At the main doors, I handed the microphone to Daniel. Provide every guest with the investigator contact sheet and the certified copy of the injunction, I told him. Preserve the full video and do not edit the exchanges for social media. I entered my waiting car as officials carried evidence containers into the venue. There were no police cruisers converging merely because I had made a speech. The legal consequence would come from bank records, witness statements, and the documents the organizers had created themselves. Several donors had already authorized payments before my presentation. Investigators asked them not to confront the organizers or delete messages. Bank representatives began placing holds where transfers remained pending, while completed payments were traced through the controlled account structure. The response treated those guests as victims whose funds needed protection, rather than as wealthy spectators useful only for humiliation. When Bradley reached the corridor, the investigators served him with a preservation notice and requested the devices used to operate the payment portal. He refused voluntary access and left with his phone. That refusal did not allow private guards to seize it. It did, however, become part of the affidavit investigators later used when seeking judicial process. The distinction kept the scene dramatic without giving my employees powers they did not possess. William and Linda attempted to continue the program after I stepped down. The venue manager cut off the donation link and announced that no further payments would be processed until the legal status of the charity was resolved. Guests collected their coats in angry silence. The gala failed because the financial mechanism stopped and credibility vanished, not because anyone was physically imprisoned in the ballroom. By the following morning, video from the gala had spread through Chicago business circles. The public attention did not produce an instant federal conviction or allow a bank to seize houses within 48 hours. It produced witnesses. Donors contacted investigators with invitation emails and payment screenshots. Vendors supplied contracts showing who had ordered the unauthorized Laura banners. The controlled transfer established the route into the account linked to Bradley's firm. Over the next 4 months, the investigation widened. IRS criminal investigation and federal prosecutors reviewed tax filings, bank records, shell entities, and the representations made to donors. A grand jury subpoenaed Bradley's business servers, and his accountants produced ledgers showing that investor money had been moved between failing properties to conceal defaults. The health complaint recording and the cash offered to Marco became evidence of a broader effort to protect the company by damaging mine. The government did not freeze every dollar belonging to every relative simply because they appeared in the same viral video. The court restrained accounts and assets for which investigators demonstrated a connection to the suspected fraud. Bradley lost control of his company accounts. Courtney lost access to property purchased through those accounts. Separate civil proceedings addressed the $150,000 transferred from my inheritance. When prosecutors finally charged Bradley with wire fraud, tax offenses, and false statements to investors, He was arrested after an indictment rather than during the gala. At the detention hearing, the judge required substantial secured bond and rejected assets whose ownership or source could not be verified. Courtney could not use the heavily encumbered house as reliable security. The mortgage lender had already begun a judicial foreclosure after months of missed payments. There was notice a court case and time to respond. The result was still devastating, but it did not happen by magic overnight. By the time a sale date was scheduled, Bradley faced criminal litigation, investors had filed civil claims, and the household had no clean income capable of curing the default. Courtney packed belongings under supervision after the foreclosure order became final. The same women she had brought to Laura watched from neighboring lawns, but none offered a guest room. Her social circle had not vanished, because poverty was contagious. They withdrew because she had lied to them, used their names in the restaurant incident, and involved donors in a fraudulent gala. William lost advisory positions after boards reviewed the injunction voicemail and inheritance records. Linda could no longer hide behind the story that I had stolen my own education fund. Their personal home was not automatically confiscated as punishment for embarrassment, but legal fees lost income, and the civil claim over my inheritance consumed the equity they had relied upon. By early winter, William, Linda, and Courtney were sharing 2 motel rooms near the industrial edge of the city, while their lawyers tried to negotiate restitution and defend the remaining claims. Bradley remained in custody because the family could not provide acceptable security for release. I followed the case through counsel rather than through a private surveillance report designed for entertainment. My role after the gala was to authenticate records, answer subpoenas, and continue running Laura. The justice process moved slowly, but each consequence rested on an identified transaction, contract order, or missed payment. Meanwhile, Restaurant Week produced the strongest quarter in the company's history. Critics praised the menu staff retention remained high, and negotiations for a second location advanced. My business grew because the kitchen performed, not because scandal automatically created a year-long waiting list. The final approach from my family came after the foreclosure order and Bradley's detention hearing. They did not arrive because I had secretly orchestrated every loss. They came because every legitimate source of money had been exhausted, and they still believed the woman they had robbed should finance the result. The inheritance dispute moved on a separate track. My attorney obtained an order preventing destruction or transfer of the remaining estate records, while the bank compared the disputed authorization with account access logs. Linda and William were required to answer written questions about who prepared the instruction and why the funds went to Bradley's company. Their responses contradicted statements from the executor and deepened their civil exposure. Courtney's own position deteriorated as investigators traced the $50,000 cash bag to the title loan and jewelry sales she had described. The money remained in evidence and later became subject to the court proceedings surrounding restitution. She was not imprisoned for approaching Marco, but the incident destroyed any claim that she had been a passive bystander in the campaign against Laura. The timing also made the rain scene plausible. It was no longer a few days after a gala held in autumn. Months of subpoenas, missed payments hearings, and winter weather had passed before the 3 of them appeared at my loading dock. The consequences felt relentless because the cases converged, but each one had followed its own documented process. While their world burned to the ground, my empire continued to soar. Chicago Restaurant Week was an unprecedented, monumental success for Laura. The public fascination with my story drove a massive surge of new clientele to my doors. People wanted to dine at the establishment owned by the woman who took down a corrupt real estate scheme with a single microphone. My reservation waiting list extended from months into an entire year. Investors were begging Daniel for an opportunity to fund my second location. I was expanding, hiring new culinary talent and cementing my legacy as an undisputed powerhouse in the global hospitality industry. I sat at my mahogany desk, reviewing the staggering revenue reports from the weekend. I felt an incredible sense of deep, abiding peace. The toxic, dead weight that had anchored me to the ground for 33 years was finally cut loose. I was free. But I knew the final desperate act of this family tragedy was yet to play out. Desperate people, with nothing left to lose, always try one last pathetic maneuver to save themselves. I closed my laptop and poured a glass of sparkling water, waiting patiently for the inevitable knock on my door. The inevitable knock did not come at my pristine glass front doors. It came exactly where I expected it to come, at the heavy steel security entrance in the rear alleyway. The universe has a brilliant sense of poetic justice, and tonight it was unleashing a brutal torrential downpour over the city of Chicago. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the thick, reinforced glass of my office windows with violent intensity. It was the exact same kind of freezing, relentless autumn storm that had raged on the night William threw me out of his house 5 years ago. My desk phone chimed with a single sharp tone. It was the direct line from the security command center. I pressed the flashing green button. Ms. Alyssa David said, his deep voice perfectly calm over the secure channel. "We have a severe security situation at the rear loading dock. The 3 restricted individuals from the blacklist are standing in the alleyway. They are refusing to leave the premises, and they are demanding to speak with you. They are completely soaked by the storm, and they look highly unstable. Should I dispatch the team to physically remove them, or should I contact the local authorities for immediate trespassing arrests?" I stood up from my leather chair, smoothing the front of my tailored suit jacket. "Do not call the police just yet, David," I instructed my voice, carrying a quiet, lethal anticipation. "Keep your men stationed inside the corridor, but stand down. I am coming down to handle this interaction personally." I walked out of my executive office and moved through the quiet corridors of my empire. The dinner service had concluded hours ago, and the kitchen was currently undergoing its nightly deep cleaning protocol. The stainless steel prep stations gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, smelling faintly of heavy citrus degreaser and clean metal. I walked past the massive walk-in refrigerators and the dry storage rooms, feeling the immense, tangible weight of everything I had built. This entire facility was a fortress of my own making, and outside its thick walls, my former family was drowning in the flood of their own consequences. I reached the rear security checkpoint. David and 3 of his largest guards were standing in a line, their arms crossed, blocking the heavy steel delivery door. David gave me a respectful nod and stepped aside, placing his hand on the heavy industrial latch. "Open it," I commanded, staring straight ahead. David threw the heavy steel deadbolt and pulled the massive door inward. The freezing Chicago wind howled into the warm hallway, instantly biting through my suit jacket. The rain was falling so aggressively it looked like a solid gray wall of water under the harsh glare of the halogen security lights. Standing there, in the center of the flooded alleyway, exactly where Bradley had pathetically dropped that dead rat just a few days prior, was my family. The sight of them was absolutely staggering. The wealthy, untouchable elite facade they had weaponized for decades was completely obliterated. William, the man who used to terrorize entire boardrooms, was shivering violently, his thin, soaking wet jacket clinging to his stooped shoulders. His expensive leather shoes were submerged in a deep, muddy puddle. Linda stood beside him, her hair plastered flat against her skull in wet gray strands. Her designer mascara had run completely down her cheeks, leaving dark, hollow circles under her terrified eyes. But Courtney was by far the most pathetic spectacle of all. My older sister, the golden child, who had mocked my clothing and my career, was on her knees on the freezing wet concrete. The rain was punishing her, beating down on her thin shoulders as she looked up at me with absolute sheer desperation. Elisa Courtney screamed over the storm. "Please, you have to help him! The federal judge will consider release only if we provide $2 million in verified security and an acceptable third-party custodian.
The house cannot be used because the foreclosure and investor claims have destroyed the equity. We have no asset the court will accept. Pledge property for the bond or he will remain in detention until trial.
Her lawyer had warned that borrowed cash with no documented source would not satisfy the court. She wanted one of my companies to sign the bond papers and guarantee that Bradley followed every release condition. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the heavy steel doorframe, her wet hands slipping against the cold metal. David immediately stepped forward to block her, but I held up my hand, signaling him to hold his position. I wanted to hear every single desperate word. William stepped closer, his voice shaking so badly his teeth were visibly chattering. "Alyssa, please listen to your sister. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank seized the house. The government locked all our accounts. We are sleeping in a filthy motel off the interstate. We have not eaten a real meal in 2 days. We are completely destitute. I know I was harsh with you in the past, but you cannot just leave your own blood out here to freeze in the street. You have millions of dollars. You can fix all of this with one single phone call to your bank." Linda stepped forward, pushing her wet hair out of her eyes. Her face was twisted in a pathetic mask of pure begging. "Sweetheart, please," she cried, her voice carrying that same manipulative pitch she used when she wanted something for nothing. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I know we made terrible, horrible mistakes, but we are family. Family forgives each other. Family protects each other in times of crisis." "You proved your point, Alyssa. You won. You beat us. We surrender completely. Just write the check and save your brother-in-law. Save us from this nightmare." I stood perfectly still under the dry, protective overhang of my building, looking down at the three of them. The freezing rain blew sideways, misting against my face, but I did not step back. I let their pathetic begging wash over me, analyzing the absolute hollow emptiness of their words. Even now, completely ruined and kneeling in a flooded alleyway, they were not truly apologizing. They were not expressing genuine remorse for destroying my youth, stealing my inheritance, or attempting to sabotage my business. They were simply admitting that they had lost the war, and they wanted the winner to pay their massive legal bills. I looked down at Courtney, gripping the doorframe. "You want me to pledge $2 million of clean property for a man accused of diverting investor money and staging an attack on my restaurant?" I asked. "You want my name attached to his promise to appear after your family ignored a court order and used my brand to solicit money?" Courtney sobbed that Bradley was frightened and that the gala had been a desperate mistake. She insisted the pressure of losing the company explained everything. The explanation contained no remorse for the donor's employees or business she had tried to damage. It was only another request that I absorb the cost of their choices. I looked at William, shivering uncontrollably in the freezing downpour. "Do you remember the storm 5 years ago?" William, I asked, shifting my gaze to his terrified eyes. "Do you remember the exact temperature of the rain the night you violently shoved me out of your front door?" "I do. I remember crying on your porch, begging you to let me back inside just to get my heavy winter coat. You looked me dead in the eye, laughed in my face, and locked the deadbolt. You told me to go starve in the gutter because I was a worthless disappointment who failed to contribute to your magnificent empire." William swallowed hard, completely unable to formulate a defense. He looked down at the flooded pavement, thoroughly crushed by the undeniable truth of his own historical cruelty. "And you, Linda," I continued, turning my attention to the woman who gave birth to me. "You stood right beside him and watched me walk away into the freezing dark with absolutely nothing. You then spent 5 long years aggressively assassinating my character to every single person we knew. You called me a monster online. You tried to launch a massive fraud campaign using my trademarked brand. You never once acted like a mother to me until you needed access to my corporate bank accounts. Linda covered her face with her shaking, wet hands, sobbing loudly into the freezing rain. "Please, Alyssa," she whimpered. "We are so sorry. We will do anything you want. We will sign any document. We will work in your kitchens. Just please do not leave us out here to die." I reached inside the interior pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I did not pull out a corporate checkbook. I did not pull out a stack of $100 bills. I pulled out a sleek black leather folder. It was the exact same presentation folder my server had used on the night of my mother's 60th birthday. I stepped forward into the edge of the rain, looking down at my mother. I opened the leather folder and pulled out a single crisp white piece of paper. It was the itemized receipt from Laura. The total printed at the bottom was exactly $4,500. I held the receipt out in the freezing rain. Linda reached up with trembling fingers, instinctively grasping the wet paper, believing, for a split second, that I was handing her a financial lifeline. She looked down at the text, her confusion mounting as she recognized the dinner order. "This is the itemized receipt from your birthday dinner," I stated. My voice radiating absolute cold finality. "You and your golden family demanded that I pay for your extravagant excess to prove my worth. You demanded that I cover your massive bill because you believed I owed you for the basic cost of my childhood existence." I looked at Courtney kneeling in the mud, and William shivering in the shadows, and finally back to Linda, holding the wet receipt. "This piece of paper represents the absolute final transaction between us," I declared, the lethal calm in my voice, silencing their pathetic sobs. "I paid your massive bill. I covered your exorbitant cost. This is the only thing I ever owed this toxic, parasitic family, and I have already paid it in full. Our ledger is completely, permanently closed. Do not ever step foot near my properties again." Linda stared at the wet receipt, her mouth opening in a silent scream of absolute despair as the reality of my words finally shattered her last remaining hope. Courtney collapsed entirely forward into the muddy water, weeping uncontrollably into the flooded pavement. William simply closed his eyes, accepting his total, inescapable ruin. I took one step backward, retreating into the warm, secure sanctuary of my multi-million-dollar empire. I looked at David, who was standing at strict attention, ready for his final order. "Close it," I commanded, without breaking eye contact with the darkness outside. David grabbed the massive industrial handle and pulled the heavy steel door shut with a loud, echoing slam that vibrated through the hallway walls. The sounds of the violent storm and my family's desperate wailing were instantly completely severed. I reached out and pressed my security badge against the electronic access panel on the wall. The system chimed, confirming the action. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed through the steel door as the magnetic deadbolt slammed into place, permanently locking the perimeter. The bright red light on the security keypad flared to life, indicating the building was completely sealed and alarmed. I turned away from the door and began walking back down the quiet, pristine hallway toward my executive office. I did not look back. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. I had spent my entire life carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of their toxic expectations. Tonight, I had finally dropped that burden directly into the mud where it belonged. The past was permanently locked outside in the freezing rain, and my future was waiting for me in the kitchen. 3 months passed since that night. The harsh Chicago winter had softened into a crisp, vibrant spring, and with the changing of the seasons came the ultimate validation of my entire existence. The grand auditorium of the Chicago Cultural Center was bathed in dramatic crimson and gold lighting. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, designer perfumes, and the palpable electric tension of the city's culinary elite. This was the annual Michelin Guide ceremony. I sat at a prominent circular table near the very front of the stage, wearing a custom-tailored sapphire gown that cascaded perfectly around my chair. I was not sitting with anyone who shared my biological DNA. I was completely surrounded by my chosen family. To my immediate right sat Chef Marco, looking fiercely distinguished in a sharp black tuxedo that replaced his usual pristine white kitchen coat. To my left sat Evan, the brilliant corporate architect I had been quietly dating for the past year. Evan had stood by my side through the entire corporate war, offering unwavering, steady support while I systematically dismantled the toxic empire of my relatives. Across the table, Daniel and Vincent were conversing quietly, their faces glowing with intense professional anticipation. The international director of the Michelin Guide stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone. A heavy, reverent hush fell over the massive auditorium. He began to speak about the resilience of the Chicago dining scene, highlighting the incredible innovation and relentless dedication required to achieve global culinary recognition. He spoke about establishments that push the boundaries of modern gastronomy, blending cutting-edge scientific methodology with deep, soulful artistry. When he began describing the next recipient, my heart executed a slow, powerful rhythm against my ribs. This next establishment has completely redefined the luxury dining experience in our city, the director announced, his voice carrying a rich, booming authority. The executive team has flawlessly integrated highly advanced artificial intelligence flavor mapping with traditional elite Parisian execution. The result is a dining experience that is both intellectually stunning and profoundly, deeply moving. For flawless service, unparalleled culinary vision, and absolute perfection on every single plate, we are incredibly proud to award 1 Michelin star to La Aura. The auditorium erupted into thunderous, deafening applause. Marco let out a loud, booming shout of pure triumph, slamming his heavy hands onto the table before pulling me into a massive, crushing embrace. Evan grabbed my hand, pressing a fierce, proud kiss against my knuckles, his eyes shining with profound admiration. Daniel and Vincent were on their feet, cheering aggressively, along with the rest of the room. I stood up, smoothing the front of my sapphire gown, feeling a wave of emotion so incredibly powerful it nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. I walked up the velvet-lined stairs toward the brightly lit stage. Marco walked right beside me, his heavy, steady presence a testament to the empire we had forged together in the fires of that commercial kitchen. I stepped up to the podium and accepted the heavy, iconic red plaque from the director. The flashbulbs of dozens of media cameras fired simultaneously, blindingly bright, capturing the exact moment of my ultimate, absolute victory. I looked out over the sea of applauding faces, the most powerful and influential people in the global hospitality industry. They were all standing on their feet for me. I did not think about Linda or William in that spectacular moment. I did not think about Courtney crying in the muddy alleyway, or Bradley sitting in a federal holding cell. They were completely, entirely erased from my narrative. They were ghosts, shadows of a miserable past that no longer held a single ounce of power over my reality. I had scrubbed them from my life with the same ruthless efficiency I used to sanitize my prep stations. Thank you. I spoke into the microphone, my voice ringing with total, unshakable confidence. 5 years ago, I was told that my passion for the culinary arts was a frivolous fantasy. I was told that I would never amount to anything without the financial backing and social approval of the people who were supposed to protect me. But I learned a very valuable lesson in the freezing streets of this beautiful city. True success is not inherited. It is built. It is built during the agonizing 100-hour work weeks. It is built in the brutal heat of a commercial kitchen, and most importantly, it is built alongside people who demand your absolute best and protect your spirit when you have nothing left to give. I turned slightly, gesturing to Marco and my executive team sitting at the front table. I did not build Laura alone. I continued, the applause dying down into respectful, rapt silence. I built it with my chosen family. To Chef Marco, who translates my digital algorithms into pure culinary magic, thank you. To my incredible front of house staff, my brilliant management team, and to the man who holds my hand through the darkest corporate storms, thank you. We built our own table, and tonight we are incredibly honored to share it with the world. The crowd roared again a standing ovation that vibrated through the floorboards of the stage. I held the heavy Michelin plaque high above my head, feeling the cool, solid weight of undeniable success. The official ceremony seamlessly transitioned into a massive private after-party hosted directly inside the main dining room of Laura. We closed the restaurant to the public entirely, transforming the elegant space into a dazzling, exclusive nightclub for my staff and closest allies. David and the security team managed the front doors with strict professional precision, ensuring that only invited, honored guests crossed the threshold. Inside, the atmosphere was pure, unfiltered electric joy. Towers of vintage champagne glasses were meticulously arranged on the mahogany bars. The kitchen staff, having shed their formal coats, were dancing and laughing, sharing expensive platters of the very same Wagyu beef and white truffles we served to our elite clientele. The massive crystal chandeliers overhead had been dimmed, casting a warm golden glow over the celebration. I stood on the elevated balcony of the private alcove, the exact same alcove where my mother had tried to humiliate me on her birthday just a few short months ago. The bitter, toxic memory of her sneering face had been completely overwritten by the breathtaking, beautiful reality of the present moment. Evan walked up behind me, slipping his arms around my waist and resting his chin gently on my shoulder. He handed me a crystal flute filled with crisp, bubbling champagne. "You did it, Elisa," Evan murmured, his voice a low, comforting rumble against my skin. "You built an absolute fortress. Nobody can ever touch you again." I leaned back against his solid warmth, taking a slow, appreciative sip of the champagne. The vintage wine danced perfectly across my palate, a brilliant, complex note of aged fruit and sharp, elegant acidity. I looked down at the dining room, watching Marco playfully argue with the sommelier over a rare bottle of Italian red, watching Vincent coordinate a toast with the executive sous chefs, watching my entire loyal staff celebrate the empire we commanded. "I did not just build a fortress, Evan," I replied softly, my eyes scanning the glittering, triumphant room. "I built a kingdom. There were no blood relatives trying to claim credit for my hard work tonight. There were no arrogant men trying to intimidate me into signing away my equity. There were no manipulative women playing the victim to steal my spotlight. I had severed the diseased branches of my family tree, and the roots of my own independent life had grown incredibly, impossibly strong." I raised my crystal flute, holding it up toward the beautiful, spectacular city skyline visible through the massive glass windows. I was a 33-year-old college dropout who had been thrown into the street with absolutely nothing. I was a woman who had been told her entire existence was a disappointment, and now I was a Michelin-starred chief executive officer, a self-made multimillionaire, and the undisputed master of my own magnificent destiny. The past was dead. The future was mine to command, and the menu was going to be absolutely